Good morning. We are ready to proceed with our session. Welcome once more. So today we have starting with Simba Pty Limited. So I have Mr. Ngobese. Mr. Ngobese, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I have just noticed that in the schedule we have external counsel mentioned, and there was no mention of a business person. Are we having a business person around, if I can ask to the legal representatives?
Thank you. I think that our business representatives are present, but for purposes of the presentation, it's going to be led by counsel.
Chair, I'm in your hands.
Okay, if you can clarify, so which part of the entire presentation?
Correct. And to the extent that there are issues which require instruction, then certainly we'll be able to obtain those and address any of the questions which the Commission might have, and the panel equally.
Okay, who's the stakeholder present today from Simba?
So we have internal counsel, Elmarie Meyer, and Anthony Viljoen from the Ground Media Department.
Okay, so if there are questions related to the business, you will be answering those questions?
Correct. Correct. Yes. With instruction, Chair. So to the extent that there are issues which need direct involvement from the business perspective, we will certainly answer those on their behalf with instruction from them.
Okay. Are they gonna be placed on record one way or the other? How do you?
If that's necessary for purposes of the panel, I mean, I think what we've understood is that this is a voluntary presentation. We were asked to present, which we're certainly doing, but to the extent that we necessitate involvement from the business perspective, we can address those questions. If the panel requires representation from the business individuals, we can take an instruction on that regard, but I don't think there's any difference in relation to the presentation being made by external counsel in comparison to what the business would say.
Yes, I think maybe the presentation may be not so much an issue. I think it's the follow-up questions
Sure.
that relate to the business specifically.
Understood.
And my preference is to hear directly from the business.
I think we'll address that, and obviously to the extent that there's anything which is confidential in terms of what we submitted on behalf of the business, we'll exercise our rights in that regard. And I know you've done this in the past, but we'll excise anything that is, or to the extent that you need to proceed, we'll do that by way of a camera hearing if necessary. But we certainly don't want anything which is conceivably confidential being exposed in the panel, given the fact that this is a public hearing, it's being addressed live. So we'd like to exercise our right in that regard. But to answer your question, if there's a need to hear directly from the business in relation to those questions, we'll take an instruction and be able to come back to you and address the panel with the requisite business individual being present.
Yeah, that's why I think maybe I just want to be clear here that we had invited the stakeholder representative, and of course it's their choice how they wish to address the panel, but there are specific questions to the business, right? And that we would like for them to answer. And I think that's the purpose of the hearing. As I say, the first part of the presentation, how you want to use that time, I think that's really your discretion. But as regards the questions directly to the business, I think I prefer that the business representatives address us on that.
That's fine. And I think, obviously to the extent that those can't be addressed now with the representative present, we will follow up with a written submission. So I think we'll take an instruction. Obviously, I don't know what the questions are. We haven't been informed of the questions, and I understand the nature of the panel. But to the extent that there are issues we can't address, and neither of these individuals can, we will certainly follow up in writing as other parties have. And I think that's what's part and parcel of the panel and what this process is designed to achieve.
No, fair enough. I think that's okay. And I think we also quite are conscious of the confidentiality and we note the nature of the hearings. So I think if there's a need to engage on confidential aspects of the submissions, you can alert us so that we follow the right procedure in that regard.
Perfect.
Mr. Ngobese.
Thank you, Chair. Just a minor matter of the oath. Now that we have probably a division into two, I presume then I won't be able to be swearing the lawyers because they don't have intimate knowledge of what they're going to present to us. So they're just going to proceed with the presentation, and then when a business person comes, then we will ask her if she will be willing to take the oath.
Perfect. Happy.
All right, I think we can then proceed, Chair.
Okay, well, let's introduce ourselves. It's John Oxon and Michael Curry from Primera Law International, acting on behalf of Simba Pty Limited, instructed by Almarie Mayer. As I mentioned earlier on, I think we have reserved our right, to the extent there are issues which are addressed and by the panel or the evidence leader to the business representatives, which cannot be addressed today, to follow those up in writing. I think for purposes of introduction to the panel members and obviously to the evidence leader, it's important to recognize Simba's participation. Now, as we suggested and set out in various of our submissions, Simba is one of the most iconic food producers in South Africa. The company's been in existence for over 60 years, manufacturing, marketing, distributing, and selling a broad variety of snack products, but most importantly for today's panel, potato salty snack products. These are produced, manufactured, sold in South Africa and exported to various other markets in Africa. The company, too, has been part of a global manufacturing conglomerate, PepsiCo, for over 30 years. And also, importantly for today's discussion, as we'll announce and pronounce on, it's been a participant in one of the largest merger reviews which have been undertaken by the agency, and that was in the food and agro-processing sector, involving PepsiCo's acquisition of Pioneer Foods. That review concluded on a number of significant public interest commitments, many of which are relevant for today's proceedings. It also provides Simba a know-how in relation to some of the critical aspects which the panel will be considering. I think as we discuss in our submissions, the scale, experience, and relationship with its parent entity are important to provide the necessary impartiality coupled with international experience for today's panel hearing. Simba's operation in the potato salty snack categories permit objective and beneficial participation, and over and above this, we obviously value the opportunity to participate, provide the panel with the requisite insight into the dynamics which exist for a food producer. I think given our position in the market as Simba and evidenced in our company's submissions made as part of this inquiry, there's a wealth of experience. We're well positioned to provide guidance and know-how in relation to those key themes identified. Before going into the substance, it's important for our panel to understand that Simba does not procure potatoes from national fresh produce markets. Rather, those are procured from growers of its own potato varietal, and these are owned and registered by Simba under the Plant Breeders' Rights Act 12 of 2018. The variety has been developed by Simba to be used as a raw material and is thereafter processed, it's transported, sorted, washed, cut, fried, seasoned, packaged for manufacturing potato chip snack products for sale to Simba customers. Simba is not involved in the downstream sale of potatoes. In addition, through its own initiatives and as a result of the direct and indirect participation in numerous merger reviews conducted by the agency, Simba has experience in relation to factors which can provide tangible assistance, and one of the issues in terms of the terms for SMMEs and HDPs to enter the market. Simba has direct know-how of the challenges faced in this regard, which we'll explain in due course today. A great deal of this experience emanates through its involvement in the Kodiso Development Fund, and in this regard, the Kodiso Development Fund was developed by Simba to satisfy PepsiCo's public interest commitments following the acquisition of PepsiCo of Pioneer. I think through Simba's activities in the fund, Simba has obtained insights into impediments to entry for SMMEs and HDPs, together with measures that are and are not effective in order to assist SMMEs and HDPs enter the market. Now, for background purposes, the fund aims to support broad socioeconomic imperatives of education, SMMEs, emerging farmers, and enterprise development across PepsiCo's value chain, and Simba has made numerous submissions on the extent of its involvement in this regard and their investment. The Kodiso Development Fund aims to support transformation of the food and beverage value chain, empowering new and current black emerging businesses, farmers, suppliers, business solution providers, distributors, and women-led enterprises, to address knowledge and skills gaps across the South African food system, and that's, for example, through applied agriculture, research and development, climate resilient crop development, capacity building, and STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, circular economy business models, and nutrition science. It also seeks to tackle local development challenges and push for tangible impact in providing funding to enable sustainable crop production, technical and business support through strategic partnerships and programs. The fund seeks consistency across multiple crops, and importantly, as we'll discuss, the initiatives have worked positively. Recently, a farmer in the northwest funded by the fund is self-funding the planting of potatoes for Simba. I think one of the central points of guidance which will be expressed today is the necessity for the panel to consider the impact of innovation on all players within the potato value chain, including factors that are important to maintaining and facilitating innovation. Investment in respect to the agriculture and agro-processing sectors. Included, we'll deal with and provide guidance on the necessity for the protection of intellectual property rights, maintaining and enhancing investment incentives, including in respect to foreign investment, facilitating research and development initiatives across all participants in the market, and reduce the subjective outcomes which could have unintended consequences. The panel should be guided by the principle that the protection of competition within the market will result in effective competition. It remains the most reliable way to ensure maximization of consumer welfare and participation opportunities. We split the presentation up into three key themes. Firstly, to deal with Simba's intellectual property and the state of play in South Africa. Secondly, how Simba interacts with its farmers. And lastly, we'll continue to provide some insights in the ability of SMEs and HDP farmers to participate in the market for potatoes. We'll expand on these in more detail through my colleague, Michael James.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So I think it would be helpful just to briefly understand that from a Simba perspective, there are two key themes or focus areas in its whole supply chain and procurement strategy. The first relates to its intellectual property, and the other relates to how it actually contracts with farmers and growers in order to develop the sort of ecosystem, internal supply ecosystem. And that's really what I want to make submissions on those two key themes. So starting with the intellectual property. In South Africa, I think the Commission is now well aware that we have both open and closed varieties being ones where they're subject to a plant breeder's right, open variety being one which anyone can access. There's no IP or licensing fees involved. There are a number of varieties in South Africa. A large portion of them are open varieties. Simba has its own proprietary variety, the Frito-Lay 2108. And this is a variety, and this is important to understand, I think, in the context of these submissions. This is a variety which Simba has developed, or PepsiCo's parent company has developed in-house, specifically for its own downstream production, for its own chip products. It's not a variety that has been developed for commercialization. It's not a variety that's been developed for selling at a fresh produce market, for example. It's not a very attractive potato. It's designed with one primary objective, which is to produce the best variety for Simba's products, given its ultimate end consumers. A lot of consequences flow from that. One is, it is a very difficult variety to grow. It is not the type of variety that gives farmers maximum yield. There are other varieties which significantly outstrip Simba's own variety in terms of yield. So, for example, the open variety Mondial, which is the most popular potato variety sold in South Africa, probably averages around 150 tons per hectare. Compare that to a free-to-lay variety that's closer to 50 tons a hectare. Simba as an organization doesn't invest in its own IP for any other purpose than to use it internally. And it's critical to appreciate this, because firms who are designed from the get-go to develop its intellectual property, particularly in this context, in order to commercialize it, in order to license to other parties, have an entirely different business model from what Simba has, where it's all used for internal consumption. Your entire business model is wholly different. You don't take on the same liabilities. You don't have the same infrastructure. You don't have the same costing. Where were you to ex ante try and develop an IP or plant breeder right in respect of a product, you take very different considerations into account. You take considerations into account which would ensure that the product you hope to develop is one which is actually commercially sustainable and that third parties would actually want, which is why I flagged at the outset that this is a very, very unique variety and is very razor-focused to Simba's needs. In terms of Simba's reliance on this variety, in South Africa, currently the majority of Simba's purchases and production is premised on its own variety. Simba has many years previously used other open varieties. Simba's position internationally is that it typically uses quite a bit of open varieties for two reasons. One is there are many suitable open varieties for processing, for the type of processing that Simba does specifically, and its parent company, and also because, as we'll get to later on in the submission, a key issue underpinning this entire supply chain is ensuring supply, managing supply. A very, very volatile issue to do. Potatoes of all crops, well, like all crops, but are particularly susceptible to climate changes. I think the Commission would be aware of the supply shortages a couple of years ago due to extreme frost. And in order to manage both Simba's expected volumes, but also to account for the fact that it's not always going to be perfect, Simba is reliant on open varieties and needs to be reliant on open varieties as well. So Simba has a very clear interest in ensuring that there are suitable and open varieties on the market, both internationally but also in South Africa. The point about Simba's supply chain is coming back to the essential requirement that it takes a very, very long-term plan for Simba to determine and work out what its volumes are going to be required in 4, 5, 6, 7 years' time. That planning starts at the outset. And I think what's critical to understand is that, yes, the free-to-lay variety, the intellectual property that Simba has developed in-house, is a good variety in terms of Simba's own needs for its end product. But in the context of the market inquiry, and we think what the Commission is, what the panel is in particular looking at, having also had in regard to the Commission's concentration report, the concerns the Commission has raised in some of the documents about access to IP and the like, we don't think in this context Simba's variety itself plays any role sort of as a gatekeeping role or the like. It's a very, from a growing perspective, it's a very sensitive product to grow, and that has particular importance when we start turning to how and who grows Simba's own potatoes. The focus of today's submission, therefore, is largely to sort of contextualize what we think is Simba thinks is the key message, which is that the intellectual property which Simba has of its own variety forms a piece of a much more complicated puzzle, and that is managing an entire supply chain ecosystem, if you like. It's in that regard that Simba contracts growers directly. It doesn't, as John mentioned, procure on the fresh produce market, at least not currently. It grows directly on the, or contracts directly with growers. The importance of that is the amount of resources and investment that goes into the whole supply ecosystem from Simba's perspective is significant. Whether Simba uses its own variety or any other variety, the critical part in the whole supply chain is managing the actual agronomy process. What makes this particularly complicated is not only the fact that it's very forward-looking, but as I mentioned earlier, it's a crop itself. It's inherently volatile. So Simba takes 10, 15-year forward-looking views on climate changes. How is it going to impact the region? What impact is that going to have on prices? What's that impact going to have on yield like? And has to balance all of that out from the get-go. So before I move on to how Simba engages growers, the intellectual property, just to round off on the intellectual property, it takes at least 10 years from a Simba perspective to get to a stage of commercializing any intellectual property. The success rate of a trial or a development phase that ultimately results in when we say commercialization, it's sort of commercialization within Simba's own business, is highly unpredictable. The success rate is very, very low. And naturally, the costs of investing in intellectual property and the prospects of success are incredibly onerous. It feeds back into why Simba doesn't commercialize its own IP in the context of third parties, because it's not an IP. It's not a company designed to license its IP or to commercialize IP outside its own business. There are several other parties and entities who do that, and who would do that far more profitably and capably than what we submit Simba would be able to do. So turning then to how Simba contracts with its own farmers, what Simba looks at primarily is regions, geographical regions, largely diversify the impact of climate, not necessarily climate changes, or that's part of the longer term factors, but floods, rains, frost, droughts, and the rest, the sort of microclimate factors. So Simba looks at different regions and also looks at regions which are suitable and mirror its own varietal development that has where the trial's been taking place. As I mentioned, it's a very, very sensitive variety. A lot of research, a lot of data goes into, from a Simba perspective and a Pepsi perspective, understanding where does that variety most suitably grow, where it will get the best yields. So it's region-specific as opposed to farmer-specific or grower-specific. Where Simba does identify regions that are suitable for its growth, it typically contracts with, well, not typically, when it engages in contract negotiations, it does so with all farmers in that region who wish to grow its variety. It doesn't negotiate individually with farmers. So whether it's a small or large farmer in that particular area, all the farmers in the region benefit from sort of joint negotiation. The reason why there's negotiations on a per region basis is primarily driven by a far larger dynamic, which must be borne in mind, which is again ties back to my earlier submissions about the type of variety we're growing here. What Simba is competing for is land, because on that land a farmer has the option of growing either Simba's own variety, any other potato variety for which there's hardly any, so there's no real switching cost, and indeed other crops. So from a farmer's perspective, before entering into an agreement to grow Simba's variety, it needs to weigh up what yield am I going to get growing Simba's variety? What yield would I get from other competing varieties, such as I mentioned earlier, a mondial variety? But there are many more. There are tens of varieties, and we can give that information to the Commission as requested, that provide far better yields. A farmer would have to, and likewise other crops, wheat. When the wheat price shot up as a result of wars in Russia and Ukraine, that incentivizes farmers to possibly shift crops. So for Simba to not entice, but negotiate a contract with a farmer to actually grow its variety, that farmer must be assured he's going to get a reasonable return on that investment. The flip side from a Simba perspective is the whole, well, maybe not the flip side. Let me first talk about the essential terms of those contracts. They're short-term, either seasonal or 12 months. They're non-exclusive. So a farmer who is contracted to grow Simba varieties are not precluded, even during that 12-month period, from growing any other variety. They, of course, can quite easily switch to another variety the following year. The prices are negotiated on a regional basis. All farmers in the region, they all get the same price. The benefit to Simba on that model is of course, the third, I suppose, key commercial term is that Simba guarantees a minimum volume offtake of that hectareage. So the farmer has assurance that up to a certain level, Simba will purchase that. Simba purchases it at gate price, meaning Simba collects the product from the farmer at the farm. The farmer does not include the transport costs to the market and the like. Where there is, or should there be excess supply, Simba has a right of first refusal on that excess supply. So the benefit from a Simba perspective is, of course, to manage not only the expected yields that it will achieve on a year-on-year basis, but also to sort of lock in a price which ensures that ultimately it can supply a product to end consumers at the most competitive price available. At the same time, it has to offer the farmer a reasonable rate of return. Otherwise, no farmer would actually even consider contracting with Simba in the first place. From the farmer's perspective, or the grower's perspective, there are the benefits of also having a locked-in price. Now, the locked-in price, of course, works both ways. Where the price in the national fresh produce market, for example, were to increase above the sort of negotiated price, well, then it would be to Simba's benefit. If it drops below the negotiated price, then that's, of course, to the farmer's benefit. So it's a hedge. For both parties, they're hedging their risk. But it does ensure that the farmer, A, knows what he's getting for that certain yield. He knows he's getting a purchaser for his product. And there's an ancillary and I think an important benefit in the context of the market inquiry is when it comes to funding. Having a guaranteed offtake agreement with an entity like Simba, Simba assists a farmer in potentially securing financing. It assists banks or any other financial institution in assessing whether or not to grant finance in the first place, alternatively, whether to grant finance on better terms than what might otherwise be the case if a farmer sought financing for a very, very volatile crop with no guarantee of what the ultimate market price would be at the time that those financing terms are negotiated. So, in the context then of SMMEs, and in the context of what we've submitted already, the free-to-lay variety itself. So Simba has never, as far as we've obtained instructions and understood, Simba has never turned away a potential farmer who wants to grow a Simba variety. Naturally, any potential farmer who wants to grow Simba's variety would need to meet certain minimum thresholds. They would need to be able to demonstrate that they can actually afford not only the seed, but everything that goes with ensuring a successful yield: fertilizer, pesticides, coping with load shedding, being able to irrigate crops. As I mentioned earlier, this is a highly difficult crop to grow. A lot of skills is required to grow potatoes. It's, of all crops, very, very capital intensive. So there are those sort of minimum requirements, I suppose. But there's no principal preclusion from anyone who wants to grow with crops of Simba, or wants to grow Simba's variety to do so. In practice, it's the commercials which are not a barrier to entry, but a determining point as to whether a farmer would want to grow Simba's crop. Would they want to take on that risk of growing a variety which does not deliver the best yield, which is a difficult variety to grow compared to other, even potato varieties, and when there are other crops and other alternatives to the markets. So all these market dynamics we think are important for the panel and the Commission to be taken into account in understanding how this all fits in together, and why it's important how Simba has gone about designing its procurement of potatoes. In relation to shortage of supply and excess supply, it's important to note that I think the key factor, from a Simba perspective, they're trying to be as efficient as possible. Ideally, they'd want to match their expected usage with the exact yield delivered. That's near impossible to do. Simba dedicates a lot of investment. They have agronomy teams which go out, try and manage this, try and ensure that they stay on top of it, and do the best they can, and they are highly skilled at doing so and very efficient at doing so. But it's near impossible to get a perfect match, if you like, between Simba's internal demand and what was produced by its variety. But why that's important in this context is generally where there is a shortage of supply in the market, it's because there will be a shortage of supply across all potato yields. And the reverse is then true as well. Where there's an oversupply, it will typically be an oversupply across the market. And when there's an oversupply across the market, so in circumstances where Simba's variety, the yields that have been delivered from Simba's variety exceed, let's say, Simba's own requirements, which happens very, very infrequently, and when it does happen, not to a large extent. It will typically be because there's been good yields and good crops across the country. The implication of that is that there's an oversupply on all varieties, including those supplied to the market, which puts downward pressure on prices at the market. And of course, the reverse is true. The final thing, I suppose, or maybe I shouldn't say final thing, but the other key point to note about potatoes is the sensitivity of potato itself. There isn't the ability to really manipulate the harvesting of the crop or the storage of potatoes for any sustained period of time. Of course, one can do it for maybe a couple of weeks here and there to try and align with processing, but one can't for months at a time go and store potatoes in cold storage, or when potatoes are ripe for harvest, to delay that harvest. So the planning has to be absolutely meticulous because it's not just a once-off harvest. It's got to be kind of be managed throughout the year. So the planning of all of that is really got to be absolutely meticulous. And I think that's one of the key issues which sets Simba apart from perhaps a lot of our competitors, or at least makes it a highly efficient organization, given how much time they invest ensuring that they try and get that right. So when just coming back to development of varieties and maybe what can be done, what should be done, is there is a clear stagnation in the development of intellectual property on potatoes in South Africa. And if it's not for the likes of the Simbas, there would be even less. But it's not the IP, it's not the plant breeder's right, which is necessarily the focal point. It should be developing potatoes that are fit for purpose. So fit for purpose in the context of what are they being used for? Are they being used for processing, frying, baking, tables, all sort of bought off shelf potatoes, and fit for purpose in terms of the geographic areas in South Africa where they're being grown. And not all of that requires creating new varieties and dedicating the resources for that. A lot of it comes down to taking existing varieties and improving those, even open varieties, and improving those and making those more fit for purpose. But for that to happen, you need an organization or body who is prepared to take charge in leading that innovation, that R&D. It will take a lot of money, it will take time, and it will require skills. But that is where, from Simba's perspective, there's been a lack of focus and there is an opportunity, and one which Simba would be interested in trying to explore further to see how one could possibly develop and advance current open varieties, because it goes back to what I said in my sort of opening remarks. Simba has a vested interest in seeking to ensure that there are suitable open varieties on the South African market, because its reliance on open varieties in South Africa is far less than anywhere else in the world. Chair, if you give me a minute just to see whether there's any key points in our opening remarks that need to be articulated. Otherwise, I trust Mr. Gobisi will have some follow-up questions. Mr. Gobisi.
Thank you for the submissions. I will prefer to ask my question to the business person, just to avoid the back and forth. So if possible, can we have the business person understand?
Is it not better to have the question first? I mean, obviously we're just utilizing the rules for proceedings, and one of which states clearly that submissions can be made via legal representatives. So I don't think we're deviating in any way from the rules, but we don't know the questions. And I think for purposes of today, we've been instructed to appear, which we're doing. It's certainly catered for in terms of the rules for participation for the inquiry. But if it might be easier to see if we can address those, we're happy to do so. I think for purposes of Simba's participation, they've elected to utilize us to make the representations, to address the questions to the extent we can, and as I mentioned to the Chair a little bit earlier on, to the extent we can't, to follow up with those in writing, and more importantly, to the extent that anything traverses anything confidential, to either have that in camera, as articulated in the rules for the proceedings, or to follow that up with written representation. So I would ask, obviously in compliance with the rules from our perspective, that those representations are made through legal counsel. We're not trying to delay proceedings, but those are our instructions to ensure that that's the process for purposes of Simba's responses. And I don't know if that makes sense from your side, but we're certainly happy to try and follow that through.
Chair, if I may make a proposal, perhaps Mr. Ngubezi could ask his questions, and then we can take instructions, a 5-minute break, take instructions from client and see whether those are instructions which our client can address, or whether we'd be better placed to address those.
Mr. Chair, if I can just make one final note on this. Maybe let's clear it up. Is it the case that we are not going to hear from a business person today? All the questions will be put through the legal counsel, and they will see if there is an answer to that question or not, which they can give today. If there is no answer which they can give today, then are you proposing that you go and take instructions from the business person who's here? Or if maybe the question is not answerable today, then it's a situation of you going back to your client and getting the information to us. So we're not going to hear from a business person today. Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't think we were saying that. I think if we understand the question, then certainly we can. I mean, I think one of the difficulties, and I expressed that to the chair earlier on, is we don't know the questions. Obviously, we've made numerous submissions. I think the Commission's had the benefit of it as to the panel. They've addressed the majority of the themes. We've given insight in relation to those by way of the presentation this morning. But you need to understand our client's perspective, and that purely is whether or not the right representation is here. We don't know. We don't know what issues were going to be addressed. We've sought to, obviously, to have an individual here who we believe could address questions, but we don't know those questions. So I think in order to be pragmatic to make this flow, if we understand the question, we certainly will seek to obtain insight, and if possible, that individual can answer those questions. But regardless, if we can't, and in order to facilitate the process, again, we'll make sure we provide written responses if we can't address those questions in response.
Amit, your hand, Chair.
Thank you for that. I think what at least is before us, so that we are all on the same page, is the submission from Simba, which was filed by the legal director of PepsiCo, Alma Rimea, and that's the basis of the engagement. So this is clarifying, some of the things that are in the submissions, and to the extent that on behalf of Simba you are able to answer those questions, we can proceed. What I would not like is a situation where you are not in a position to answer. You sit before us, but you are not equipped to answer the questions, and you keep asking instructions. I think that is something that I think will make a mockery of these proceedings. So if you are able to, and I assume you have engaged, you have, with the submissions, the underlying documents, the background to the submissions, you've given us the background, I think we can proceed. Right, but I think if it turns out that you aren't familiar with the business at all, and you you keep seeking instructions, I think we may have to engage and see how best to proceed. Right, in that. But I think if you are comfortable speaking for Simba, because these are submissions on record which will inform deliberations in future on how we proceed on this inquiry. I'm quite okay with that.
Thank you, Chair. I think just for the record, Simba is here to try and engage in good faith and assist the panel. We haven't come here in any way to frustrate proceedings or make it complicated for the panel. We've been instructed, of course, to make the submissions, as Chair, you've alluded to. The witnesses, I understand Mr. Kobezi wants to take an oath, an affirmation. Now, whether that's appropriate or not, we can discuss, but we need to know. That's why one of the reasons why we need to know what the questions are. Are there questions directed at the legal director? Are there questions directed at the business representative? Are there questions on which we've been briefed? Because I understand it was communicated to the Commission that we'd be making representations on behalf of Simba, and I don't believe there was any objections raised. So that's why we've prepared as the way we have, and why we've approached it as the way we have. And if we're going to deviate from that, we'd need to engage our client and take instructions. Thank you, Chair.
May I suggest that we proceed, Mr. Ngobese? So you ask the questions you have for Simba has elected to communicate through their legal representatives. I think it's their right to do so. So I think maybe we can proceed on that basis, and I think we'll assess how this goes.
Thank you, Chair. All right, I just have a few questions arising from the presentation, and then I have a couple of other questions which relate to the submission in general. With regards to the presentation, I know you've mentioned that the growing this FL 2108 variety of potato is difficult. What sort of incentive does Simba give to farmers to grow this variety, given the difficulty that is involved in growing it? What type of incentive does Simba provide to farmers to, for instance, forego the growing of other variety and grow the FL 2108?
Chair, in order to avoid the stop-start, I thought maybe the anticipation would be that Mr. Nkobisi gives all his questions, and we can have a look at them and see which ones we can answer. But I can certainly answer this one. I think the incentive is in the price as ultimately negotiated with the farmer. The farmer has to weigh up whether it makes commercial sense for him to grow the FL 2108 or whether to grow another variety, and that's part of a negotiation between the farmers in the region to look at what is the expected yield, what were the climate factors the previous season, what's the expected climate factors, what are competing crops doing. The farmer's going to work out what does he expect the market price in the fresh produce market to be, and that's ultimately how you arrive at a commercial price, which makes it feasible for the commercial to decide to farm that variety.
Yes. Then as a follow-up on that answer, so given that Simba uses price to incentivize the farmer to grow this particular variety, does Simba has a view on this type of incentives that it provides to the farmers with respect to the price of other variety? Do you know what sort of impact it has? Does it have any effect of pushing up the prices for other varieties? Or what is Simba's view on the impact of the incentive that it provides on the farmers to grow its variety with respect to the rest of the potato market?
Chair, Simba's entire volume of potatoes which is procured by Simba is less than 6-7% of the total potato volume in the market. So whatever price is negotiated with the farmers, that's not going to have, I would submit, any impact on the broader market, sort of the national fresh produce market. I'm not sure I fully understand the link between equating a price to an incentive. The price is what's negotiated with. That's a contractual negotiated price. It's not an incentive as such. I'm not, but maybe we're talking about the same thing here. This is just about the negotiated price between Simba with a farm in a particular region, and saying that, of course, has to give the farmer a reasonable return. Otherwise, the farmer wouldn't enter into that contract in the first place. And at the same time, Simba's got to ensure that it's procuring potatoes at the most economical and feasible basis to pass on a competitive and good quality product to end consumers. So it's a question of just getting that equilibrium, but that's just ordinary commercial negotiations.
Yes. No, we can pass this point. I think probably the question to be asked is, the farmers normally grow a variety of potatoes, and they have a choice between whether to grow a Simba variety or to grow other varieties. So if the Simba variety is offering a higher price, obviously the farmer will prefer to grow the Simba variety. Of course, provided that the cost of producing that varieties are quite reasonable as well. So he will choose to grow the Simba variety based on the price that is going to be offered by Simba. So the incentives come from there to say maybe the farmer then will sort of, when it decides whether to grow the other varieties, it must check whether the price is sufficient for it to stop growing the Simba and grow the other varieties. So there's a relationship between the two prices. That's what I'm trying to say.
I think that's right, Chair, but I think the point to add is it's not static pricing at the point of when Simba negotiates its price with the farmers. It's forward-looking. So the comparative price that you're comparing is the price which Simba locks in with its farmers beginning of the year versus the price that the farmer would achieve at the fresh produce market at the time of harvest. Now, no one knows what that price is going to be because that's affected by climate changes throughout the season. No one knows what the total crop yield is going to be for the market. And so the market price at the time of that farmer's harvest is volatile. It could be higher or lower than the price which is negotiated with Simba. And that's why we mentioned it's a hedge for the benefit of both Simba and the grower.
Yes. Historically, have the prices been beneficial to Simba or farmers, the Simba prices, the lock-in price? Do you know if it has been beneficial to Simba or the farmers?
You would have to ask the farmers, but there's several farmers who re-enter into these contracts with Simba. They're short-term contracts, so presumably if they weren't favorable, farmers wouldn't be entering into them.
Yes. Okay, so the other question I had relating to the presentation, if Simba does not license its IP, I presume then Simba sees a benefit, being able to recoup the investment it has made in the IP internally by selling its own products. That is why it doesn't license the IP. So is that the case? Is that the reason why they don't license the IP because they are able to recoup the investment themselves internally?
No, Chair. Of course, Simba seeks to justify its investment in the IP, but it recoups it not in the sense of commercializing this IP internally, because it doesn't commercialize its IP internally other than it uses it for its own production. So what Simba would view it as saying, well, the investment into developing a potato that is most suited for Simba's product is justifiable because it can bring a product to the market at the best value, at the best rate, that meets the end user's profile. From a processing perspective, it's the right size, it's the right color, it's the right texture, and Simba sees a value in investing in the variety for its own product. So of course, it wouldn't be investing if it didn't think it made commercial sense to invest. But it's the whole business model, which I was trying to allude to earlier, which is very different from a party who develops IP or in order to commercialize to third parties. That's a very different business model, and that was the point I was trying to make about why Simba doesn't, or PepsiCo doesn't license to third parties. And it doesn't do. That's not just in South Africa. Pepsi doesn't license IP to anyone in the world for the same reasons.
Yes, so that's what I meant, Mr. Kari, that in production of its products, it uses the IP, so its benefits arising from production of its own product exceeds those if it were to license the IP to someone else instead of using it internally itself to produce its own product. That's what I meant.
Yes, we're on the same page.
So can you just explain to us how do these regional negotiations with farmers take place? I understand Simba negotiates with the farmers in the region, How do those take place? Is it do they get together and then they negotiate the price with Simba? How do they actually happen?
The principle behind it is getting submissions from farmers to say, all right, what do they think the yields would be? What do, all those factors I mentioned earlier about what price would farmers essentially?
Sorry, Mr. Kai. Logistically, how do they happen? Is Simba go to a region and get together the farmers in a hall and then start negotiating with them? What are the logistics of it?
I'd have to take instructions on how they actually administer that on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. And then I think there's two arising from the presentation. So regarding the assistance that Simba provides to the banks to be able to finance the growers, what does Simba do, in fact, that sort of brings the banks to provide assistance to the growers? What is it exactly that it does that entices the bank to provide the finance to the growers?
I don't understand that Simba brings banks to finance the farmer. The submission was that by concluding a contract with a farmer for a guaranteed offtake agreement, that is something which a farmer can take to the bank to try and get credit and finance, and that banks typically consider that more favorably than a situation where a farmer doesn't have that offtake agreement.
Okay. And on the issue of the surplus, what happens to a situation where there's been a surplus of this FL2108? Where does it go? Does the farmer then commercialize it himself, or does Simba takes it and stores it? What happens to the surplus?
So contractually, Simba has a right of first refusal on surplus, can decide whether the farmer should sell to third parties or whether Simba acquires it itself. Our instructions are that that surplus has been very few and far between, that there has been a surplus, at least of any material kind. I think Pepsi acquired, if I understand correctly, Simba acquired that surplus. So it's not an issue which Simba is faced with or grapples with on a season-to-season basis.
Okay. All right, then let's just go to the questions generally on your submissions. Maybe let's start talking about the farmers first. So what is the criteria that Simba uses to identify which farmers to partner with or enter into agreement with? What criteria do they use?
Chair, so just to reiterate, the approach from Simba is identifying regions first, not farmers. So it first looks at regions. As I mentioned in my submissions, or the submissions we made earlier this morning, any farmer who wishes to grow Simba's variety is entitled to, or Simba would typically look to contract with that farmer, provided they're, of course, able to meet those minimum requirements that I alluded to earlier. The fact that they are able to purchase seed, irrigation, fertilizer, pesticides, deal with things like load shedding. From Simba's perspective, they just want to make sure that the farmer is actually going to successfully produce a yield at the end of the season. Otherwise, that puts their entire supply chain at risk if that's not the case. So they've got to meet those requirements. They've also got to ensure that they've got the ability to meet various regulatory requirements, things like anti-bribery policies. Simba's part of a global organization, and likewise there are requirements that they are consistent with Simba's sustainability policies and protocols, which are all publicly available documents. But other than those are sort of the thresholds.
Yes. Do you have an idea of how many farmers Simba has contracted with in the country?
I think farmers who own that about 72.
72. Do you know how many potato growing farmers are there in the country? Do you have an idea?
I don't. I can check our notes, but I don't offhand.
So can you take us through how Simba contracts with the farmers? Especially in the event that the product is suitable for human consumption, but does not meet the standard of Simba. So let's say Simba is contracted with the farmer to produce the FL2108, but when it comes out of the ground, it's not probably the shape or whatever the criteria that Simba uses to judge whether it fits its standard. If it doesn't come out right, or what happens to that product? What is the contract saying regarding the product that don't meet the standard?
Well, contractually, I understand that Simba would have the right not to take that product if it doesn't meet the standards. In practice, Simba would, of course, make an election as to whether to accept that product, or if it's so inherently deficient, to reject that product.
So the farmer would be able to sell that product in the fresh produce market.
I believe that is the case.
And who bears the risk then if the product doesn't come out right? It means if Simba says, I'm not taking the product, that means the farmer basically is the one that must go and try and see if it can sell the product. Otherwise, there is no price being paid by Simba, is it?
Yeah, so if the products don't meet the conformity standards, then that would be the risk for the farmer. What Simba does do, and this is why it's so costly to invest, is in a team of agronomists to try and assist and manage and ensure that doesn't happen. Because, as I mentioned earlier, to try and manage that supply chain, that you have the perfect yield offtake that meets your demand, it's not it's not a question of Premier just going and contracting with all kinds of farmers, and then when there's excess decides not to take that product. So it's a massive investment for for Pepsi for each hectare of potato farm. So Simba tries to manage that process as efficiently as it can. But to get to the contractual point, yes, if the products don't meet specifications, that's the risk for the farmer, which is also why farmers require that reasonable price, because it's taking that risk.
Yes. Okay, you've indicated in your presentation that Simba does use the other variety, albeit or occasionally, if probably there's a shortage in FL2108. When Simba has to obtain the other variety, does it go to the same farmer it is contracted with for the FL, or does it go to other farmers directly, or does it go to the fresh produce market? Where does it go to obtain the additional product?
We'll go to the fresh produce market for other farms, unless the farmers that it already has contracts with might not have other varieties. So it might go and source from other farmers directly, but I'll have to take instructions whether they actually procured from the fresh produce market.
So they have procured from the fresh produce market?
No, I'm saying I'll have to take instructions whether they've actually procured from the fresh produce market. I said that would be an option for them to go to, but I'd have to take instructions whether they've actually procured.
Yes. Yeah, we just want to know what happened historically when there's a shortage of the variety that they are using, if they've gone to the fresh produce market or directly to the farmers. So can you just take us through the process that will be involved in when the variety concerned, the FL2108 or any other varieties that had been Simbas before, when the rights expire, what will normally happen at that stage?
Just repeat that again.
When the IP right that is protected by blind breeders when it expires, what will happen then? Does it become then an open variety that everybody can source? How does Simba make it available to the rest of the market, if there's anything that Simba needs to do at all at the expiry?
Yeah, so the plant breeder's rights attached to a variety is between 20 and 25 years. So it is still under a plant breeder's right. But at the lapse of that, it would become an open variety. You're right, Mr. BC.
Yes. So the IP will be available to the open market, and anyone who wants to access it can approach the relevant authority. Who wants to obtain that right can approach the relevant authority.
Chair, when a variety is open, you can approach the party who develops and procures and sells that IP. You don't need regulatory authority or approval to access that IP.
Have you had such approaches before from the market?
It's not an open variety yet. It's still under plant breeder's right.
The ones which expired. You had previously had other varieties which were proprietary to Simba, and on expiry, did you receive any request from anyone as Simba to access the rights?
No. As far as our instructions are, we've never been approached, or Simba's never been approached.
But there have been other varieties which were proprietary to Simba in the past. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. So you're saying there've never been anyone who approached you when those expire to obtain access to those
Not
rights?
as far as we understand, Chair.
Okay. So,
excuse me, Mr. Kari, I think because they're here, I think the business can also assist to answer those questions. And I think if you want to take instructions, please feel free to do so.
Thank you.
Yes, so that at least we are able to exhaust an issue.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Chair.
yeah. No, they need to be on record. And I think maybe if they are closer to you, it's even better.
okay. Then we can move on from that question. If you can just take us through the research and development process that was involved in making this particular variety, the FL2108. Just take us through what is involved in probably even the period of time it takes to actually come to the relevant, suitable product.
Sure, I'll answer.
Yeah.
Sure. Just for the purpose of record, my name is Anthony Viljoen, and I lead the agronomy department within the Simba PepsiCo South Africa business. So I can give you the gist of how varieties are developed within PepsiCo. So we own an R&D farm in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, whereby we cross-pollinate different varieties for specific properties. Now, it's crucial to understand that this cross-pollination happens on a tetraploid basis. So in other words, the genetic DNA samples are 4-strain, and that multiplication then becomes quite difficult to determine what the outcome is going to be. So you need to be very adept at understanding what your requirement is. So what we do is we put in a benchmark, and in this case it's FL2108, and then we breed against that. And there's a multitude of trials that are executed in Wisconsin, and this time frame takes the minimum of 8 years before we do formal selection. So we do multiplication into a multitude of plots. We have a technical services manager in South Africa that looks for specific properties that are beneficial to South Africa's, let's say, soil-borne challenges. So we have a lot of soil-borne challenges in South Africa with a lot of excess or overpropagation of soil, and therefore the bacteria that sits in the soil becomes adverse. So the intent from Simba or PepsiCo's side is to breed something that is beneficial to the farmers that plant for us, given the circumstances where we are. And then from there, we bring in the genetics based on selection. So that's phase one. When those genetics come to South Africa, they come in vitro tubelets, and they go into quarantine to make sure that there are no alien diseases that are present. So for any soil-borne diseases that could be found in a different continent, that needs to be cleared, and then it goes into a gene bank once released by the department, and from there we start doing the propagating into greenhouses. That then in the multiplication phase takes a year to go from one generation to the next, given that the certification standard and requirement is met. So in other words, if generation 0 goes to 1 and 2 and 3, we can start doing area trials. So we've got a standard in PepsiCo to say we've got a comparison in our trial methodology that showcases if we plant it against the benchmark, we're either going up or down. And these are the requirements that we need to adjust from a variety-specific agronomy perspective. So it's not necessary to say if you grow one variety next to the next and you have a blanket approach that you're following the right approach. We need to have data-driven, informed basis to say this variety is, and I'm going to get a little bit technical so you might lose me here, but the phenological growth curve of one potato is not necessarily the same as the other. Therefore, the comparison of FL21.8 versus Mondial is something that is quite prevalent because Mondial is much easier to grow than 21.8. And you need to formulate a model that is suitable for the growth and expansion of this variety. But that sits within the capability of the farmer themselves. PepsiCo as a whole themselves do not have the ability to expand a base to teach everybody how to grow this, but they can give information on how to do it. But as we go along and we multiply, we go into a three-phase qualification for it. And that is agronomical, so is it better than the existing standard, yes or no? Production at factory, yes or no? And from a consumer perspective, most importantly. So from a consumer centricity perspective, do we have an adverse impact on our product, yes or no? That takes another 4 years as minimum to do for a validation or qualification run. And then when you decide to commercialize that variety, that takes another 5 years. So you have to start again from genetics and commercialize. Otherwise, you sit with excess liability of something that you have to buy out and discard.
Mm-hmm. Okay, in the process of doing all that, do you check the ease with which that particular variety is going to be grown? Do you also check the difficulties of growing it in the process of doing your R&D? Do you have an idea at that stage that this variety is going to be sort of hard to grow? Do you get that indication at that stage?
Look, I don't really understand the intent of the question, but it's directionally very difficult to understand whether it will be easy or difficult variety to grow unless you've got the scale to accumulate data to inform that decision. So you need to have scale to accumulate data to inform the decision. Therefore, Mondial is 60% of the country at this moment, and everybody openly shares practices. It's because it's sitting in a centralized point where you can actually point to, change this or that, and it could help. But if you've got small volume, which is 6% of total, it's difficult to do that. And if you do it on a trial basis, it's even more difficult.
Yes. So from a cost perspective, would you say growing the FL2108 is a bit higher than growing a Mondial, for instance, from a production growing perspective?
So the makeup of input cost of each variety is different. So when you grow for the market, typically you have other elements of expenses that you take into account from a costing perspective. You need to pay the market agent fee. You have to pay the transport. There's elements of labor that are not applicable in any processing element. So besides from Simba, processing is direct from the farm straight to factory without the packaging requirement of putting something in a paper bag. However, Mondial doesn't necessarily just get sold to the market. It gets sold to Mozambique, it gets sold on the back of a bakkie. 40% of our volume nationally is sold on an informal trade basis, where we have zero traceability of where it goes. The barometer of pricing is formulated by the national fresh produce market, And that is on a supply and demand basis on a day-to-day situation. So yesterday the national average price was 96 Rand per 10 kilogram bag, and that was informed by 620,000 bags that were available to be sold on the market yesterday.
Yes,
and
so
those elements of pricing change daily. So it depends on what your element is. But to answer your question, the requirement to fertilize a variety that gives you 120, 130 tons or 150 tons a hectare is slightly more expensive because your nutrients requirement is more expensive. It's a little bit cheaper to fertilize 2108, but it's not a substantial difference. But
yes,
what you achieve from a net revenue perspective is dependent on yield.
yes, so the growing an FL2108 might be slightly more expensive than growing a Mondial.
No, it's cheaper.
It's cheaper.
Yeah.
Where is the difficulty then in growing it? Because we've been told by Mr. Curry that
Okay.
it is a difficult product to grow.
Shall I technically answer this question?
Yes.
Okay, so I hope you can follow. The phenological growth makeup of this variety makes it very susceptible to fungi present in the microclimate environment, right? So there's a disease called blight early, late blight, alternaria alternata. That susceptibility means that you need to be very adept at understanding the microclimate zone of the growth area of where the plant itself is, right? A mondial has a lot more resistance to blight. Blight can take, late blight can take out a crop in 2 days, gone. Have you ever heard of the Irish famine? All the potatoes that were produced in the 1800s, gone. That was late blight, right? This variety itself is very susceptible to late blight. So you need to have the level of proficiency to understand from a relative humidity perspective in your evapotranspiration zones. In other words, where the plant grows, you have to understand what the moisture content is. If it's high moisture, you've got higher levels of exposure, and your application of whatever agent you choose to use in combat to that needs to be very efficiently applied. In order to do that, you need to be really on point. So if you miss a week, you miss a crop. The other element is that the growth phase of this potato, in terms of its bulking curve, is not the same. A mondial bulks a lot earlier in its actual growth time. So let's assume that a potato grows 15 weeks effectively at any plant. Mondial grows a bit longer, but let's use 2108 as an example. Our physical growth time is where we bulk 30% of the volume, week 13, 14, 15. So if you don't keep the crop healthy and alive in that time frame, you will not get that 30% of volume that you need to obtain. But that stems from soil health in the beginning. And this is hence why, in the reference to the submission that we made, the sustainability requirements is your soil is the foundation that you start off with. And that foundation gives you everything in terms of your natural plant health and the ability to grow a good potato. And it's very finicky unless you understand how to execute that.
Yes, so that basically takes care of the difficulties of growing an FL2108,
Yep.
which probably adds to cost of growing it, right?
No, it doesn't necessarily add to cost. It adds to when to react and how to react.
Okay, but the cost aspect falls more on the Mondial, is what you're saying. It's very costly to grow a Mondial compared to an FL2108.
You can grow a mondial at exactly the same cost and have more yield if you wanted to. It just depends on what you choose to do.
Okay.
Chair, perhaps to clarify, the cost per yield, is that high or low on a mondial?
If we take
Yes.
let's go back to the formulation of pricing, and we talk about negotiation, etc. We have to look at a break-even cost per ton, right? So in other words, what is input cost, what is yield potential? If you use that yield as a denominator of break-even, you can say cost per ton is X, right? If we say mondial today, as where it is today, and it gives you 90 or 100 tons a hectare, even though the net cost per hectare is higher, the break-even cost per ton is significantly lower, but it's also underwritten by the price achieved on the day-to-day fresh produce market value, right? So therefore, a farmer can choose to enter in something more fixed or more volatile.
Okay, from a pricing perspective now, which you touched upon, what is the Mondials compared to FL2108 in terms of pricing? How do they look like in the market?
Okay, so I'm trying to answer this as best as I can.
Basically, you buy the
If we send the
products.
same thing to the market, which one would get the best price? Is that what you're asking?
Yes,
Okay.
but remember the actual price that you pay to the farmer compared to the price that the farmer obtains, for instance, for a mandiel in the market. If you do check that, what do you see? What's the difference in those prices? If you do check it, but if
as
you
mentioned in the submission, that the pricing model of anything sold on the fresh produce market is volatile. So it can either go up or down. It can either be higher or lower. So there's no comparable reference to make unless you take long-term data, which could be skewed because it depends on where it comes from and when it came from somewhere. What I can tell you is that if we sold the same potato on the same day, so in other words, we send one 2108 to the market and we send one mondial to the market, the consumer buys with their eyes. It's an aesthetically either pleasing or displeasing variety, right? If our 2108 has got a russet skin set, therefore makes it aesthetically displeasing, which means it gets a class C grade or third grade. So a mondial has got a smooth, round finish as well as a cifra. There are certain times and certain pockets in supply where farmers can choose to supply from a specific time because they know that consumers want something that looks good, irrespective of taste preferences. And that will automatically, depending on size grade, so so your larges and large mediums, and that of your pack out from the farm will give you a higher materialization. But it's more the aesthetic value of the variety that makes it more pleasing. And hence, back to the submission of PepsiCo develops varieties specific for our requirement. Because we stand and fall by our variety, we want to take in everything because we want to make a product for our consumers.
Do you compare, do you take a series of potato prices over a period just to see where the prices are generally in the market? Let's say 5 years. Do you normally do that at Pepsi to see how the market has been performing, especially the fresh produce market, over a period of time with respect to potato? Do you do that sampling?
There's a weekly report sent out by Potato South Africa that you can view that every Monday.
Yes. You do get that report.
Anyone in the public domain can get it.
Yes. What has been the general price of potato in the past 5 years? Has been an increase over the past 5 years?
Potatoes in general?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go off memory, but I presented this internally last week. So potatoes is, there's a 9.5% reduction of supply to the national fresh produce market year to date. And there's a 74% versus the 5-year average. 74% increase in price year to date versus a 5-year average. And that's the information I've got off the back of my mind.
Is there a reason for such price increases? Is there an indication in the report, maybe even within Pepsi,
Well,
what is driving those price
Well,
increases?
there's fact and there's speculation. So the fact is there's been numerous weather events that have led to reduction on volume at the markets. But there's also a potential for volume not necessarily being channeled through the market as much as it used to in the past because of other avenues of marketing that exists in the informal trade. So the fresh produce market, we all need to remember that it's the barometer for price, but it doesn't necessarily mean that volume has to go to the market.
Okay, just a few questions that we need to go through. What has been the growth in Simba's supply of the PC snack over the same period, maybe 5 years? Have you seen a steady growth in your supply of the snacks?
I can give you a 10-year view if you want. So from let's say 2010 to 2014, we had about a 7% compounded annual growth rate. And then we had a decline from 2015 to 2019. And only when COVID came around, when consumer trends started changing and spending patterns started changing, we started building back up again. But if you look at it holistically over a specific period of time, we're only about 5% higher than where we were 10 years ago. So it's very difficult to predict where the economy is going and where it's going to go, but obviously the intent is always to grow
Yes.
and contribute to the economy.
In the same period, have you seen a growth in the number of farmers that you are purchasing the potato from?
I think so. I'm gonna generalize and say that agriculture in South Africa is a very difficult space to be in at this point in time because of increasing input cost, and therefore we've seen a pattern where larger farmers have consumed smaller farmers because scale is the only way to absorb the element of risk. So it's been documented across the world where there's a steep decline in input cost elements on farm. You end up sitting with less farmers that have got more scale, and it's increasingly more difficult for small-scale farmers to enter the market because of that risk and element of price.
Yes, so you're saying the profile of your farmers is skewed more towards larger-scale farmers than small-scale farmers?
In potatoes in South Africa in general, yes, because of the nature of the cost of the crop. The easier entry to market is cheaper alternative crops, and that's where we start losing our farmers to. We lose them to maize, we lose them to wheat, we lose them to soya, because the margins currently are very similar in rand value. The only difference is that the revenues aren't the same. So if you have to service your liability from a revenue to liability ratio, you have no choice then to plant a high value crop.
Yes.
But if you've got access to mechanization and you can get a similar margin, it's a much easier choice to make.
Yes. So, is there any assistance? There was a chat, of course, about certain assistance to provide to small farmers. Can you just give us a view on successes that you've seen with the assistance you are providing to small farmers, HDPs?
So, it's from a Simba agronomy team perspective, we assist in technical elements like when to plant, when to harvest, but the physical growth of the crop itself requires a lot more intensive intervention daily. So, we've seen very good examples where co-ops in certain areas have employed agronomists to service their emerging farmers, but then have also employed a mechanization hub, because very often the barrier to entry is the cost of mechanization. If you've got 10 hectares to cultivate and you need to buy a 5 million rand planter and harvester, it's just not possible to pay it back. Therefore, you need to aggregate the scale and have a secondary service provider that's going to help you with all of those elements to do it. So there are, in the reality, in South Africa, we'll need to hold hands to make a success out of this. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Yes. Okay, just a few things that what is your, I think your major input cost will be potato, right, in your PC snack business? The major input cost is it potato or something else?
We can respond to that because I don't know. I don't have the facts. I'm not the financial person.
You can just indicate to us what's your major input cost in your processing.
For potato chips itself.
For potato chips, PC.
Because a snacks business has got a multitude of variables.
Yeah, just for potato snacks.
So the major input cost drivers is film, packaging, seasoning, oil, and potatoes. Those 5 things.
In that order?
Not in that order. No specific order, because it varies. It depends on. So sunflower oil, for instance, was influenced by the Ukraine war, as my colleague referred to, and therefore the price of palm and all other oils went way up. All of us as consumers would have known that the oil price shot up, which means it overtakes either number 1, 2, or 3, but it changes every year.
Yes. Just generally as well, just explain how long does it take to keep the potato? I know it's a perishable product before you can.
How long does it take to?
To store it before you can use it. What is the period? Yeah.
So in the submission, there was reference to meticulous planning. Right?
Yes.
In South Africa, we're fortunate, but also disfortunate. The fortunate part is that we have climate that enables us to grow potatoes every single day of the year, grow and harvest every day, which means we have to harvest every day, right? So the storability of our potatoes is extremely low, especially in areas where it's excessive heat. So when we start now, the current harvesting window is Limpopo up north. As we all know, it's in excess of 35 degrees Celsius. You cannot put that in a store because it's highly perishable, it won't last. So if you don't plan that properly, it's got 48 hours.
Okay, just generally as well, in your crisps business, have you seen a rise in costs of production? And what are the causes of that?
Of production?
Yes, in your PC snack business, have you seen a rise in cost? I know it might be confidential, but...
This is not a domain where I can share
Okay.
costs, because it most certainly is a confidential answer.
Okay, all right. No, thanks, Chair. I think I'm finished.
Thank you, Mr. Ngobese. Mr. Mare, do you have any questions?
Yes, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and through you, mostly clarifying questions based on the presentation, but also some of the responses we've seen. I think the first is, and we've spoken around what happens with excess supply in those instances, so we do understand that that doesn't happen very often. It might not be a big problem. But I think what we haven't had for the record is, what happens to the excess supply? And I think there the question is, does Simba require the farmer to destroy the excess supply? Does Simba allow the farmer to sell the excess on the NFPMs, or are there any restrictions placed on the farmer when there is a situation of excess supply?
Okay, so I'll take that. So we have a real life instance where we had excess in 2018. Even though the reference to contractual obligation is minimum guaranteed offtake plus our ability to exercise our right of refusal, we fall and die by our variety, which means if we want commitment and buy-in from any farmers, we need to make sure we're consistent in the way we treat our farmers. Because if we're 7% of a market, it's very difficult for us to obtain a supplier base. And if we're not consistent in how we do things and execute things, then it becomes a problem. So where our loyalty lies, the farmer's loyalty lies, and vice versa. So our supplier base is treated in a very specific way, and that's always consistent. In 2018, we donated 18 million rand worth of potatoes to drought relief in the Northern Cape, and we paid out in full.
Maybe as a further follow-up, I mean, and I think this goes to the statement that you compete for land, only have 7% of supply or production. Are you aware of instances where a particular farmer said, look, I also have power here. Simba is not the big bad wolf. I also have power here. I'm going to switch to a competitor of Simba and grow their potatoes. Are you aware of any such instances?
Yes, we are. But I mean, there's nothing that prohibits them from growing to anyone. And actually, we encourage a bit of balance in their business. For me, as much as I like a dedicated farmer to us, I don't want to be the cause of setting someone up for failure. So the choice that they make from a business perspective is completely down to their rationale.
All right, and then another issue that I'm not sure the record will be clear, so I just want to get the specific answer, and it's about how prices are negotiated with your contracted farmers. And I think the question boils down to when you negotiate that price. So we do understand that prices are locked in at the beginning, and a farmer will have to decide whether he's going to lock in his price now or whether he's going to take the chance to sell it at the NFPMs at a price that might be 7-8 months down the line. But in your negotiations with your farmers, I mean, does Simba benchmark that price against, for example, the prices of potatoes that are obtained at NFPMs, whether that is a long-term or a short-term, a daily price, a 5-year price? In other words, are the NFPMs used as some form of benchmarking for purposes of your own negotiations?
Chair, sorry, we're just checking whether that's a confidential...
I mean, maybe, Chair, it just might be easier, I think, for purposes of the submission, we can always follow that up in writing, and it might be easier to do so.
All right. Then the next question...
Can you confirm if you are not able to answer, and then what's the constraint? I just want that confirmed.
Yes, Chair.
You're just trying to figure out whether...
No, we're fine. Our class confirmed that would be confidential at this stage.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So you will make a further submission on that. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The next question would be is when, in terms of Simba's contracted growers, and we've heard some statements about Simba has to comply with anti-bribing legislation and worldwide standards and that sort of thing. I'm specifically interested in what's called global agricultural practice, requiring farmers to say, look, you know, in supplying us, these are the sort of quality standards, not from a grading perspective, but from a good agricultural practice standard. Does Simba require sort of those standards? And it's mostly referred to as global gap, but there are similar instances. Do you require your farmers to comply with global gap and to have global gap certification?
Yes, but I'm going to answer this in a PepsiCo specific perspective, right? So whilst we put food safety and quality first and our consumers first, we also understand that the capability of farmers across the globe isn't necessarily first world always. So we do not discriminate and classify whether you're capable or not capable, but what we will do is assist in the journey and start with local gap, which is a lower tier of requirement, and then you sequentially progress to global gap in order for us to uphold that requirement. But this is a global SQA, so quality assurance venture for PepsiCo.
All right, thank you. And then also in terms of your sort of business model, and what I refer to that is that, you know, Simba grows its own in-house varieties, it has its own agronomy teams, it deals with this contracted farmers on that's what I refer to business model. So to the best of Simba's knowledge, I mean, how common is that sort of business practice locally and internationally? I mean, in your competitors, I mean, is this, everyone does this way, or is this sort of unique to Simba?
It's very common globally.
All right. And then, Chair, my final question is, and we've heard from the presentation at the start about, I think the statement was there's a clear stagnation in the development of potato IPs in South Africa. And, you know, some collaboration might be required. So I want to explore that a little bit to say, I mean, and I think the reference was, if not by name, then by inference at least, to say the Agricultural Research Council in this country. So what has Simba's experiences been with the ARC, particularly in sort of real-life examples? Have you reached out to the ARC? What has been your sort of, you know, factual experiences with, you know, perhaps trying to collaborate, or your experiences with the ARC?
So I think we have to go back in history a little bit. There used to be variety development for potatoes, specifically within the ARC, that where there was actually, I mean, one of the regions in South Africa where we can produce potatoes 12 months a year is the Sandveld, which is in the northwestern Cape area. There was a variety called the Sandvelder, which was bred by the ARC, specific to fit for purpose, etc. But the reality is that, and I mean, plant breeders' rights aside, if we do not innovate quick enough, we will not be able to curb the influence of inflation by offsetting that with improved volume and yield and quality. And that's why those varieties have fallen off the bench, because we've had to, and I say the agricultural sector of South Africa has had to partner with Europe to access their varieties. So majority of our varieties in South Africa are, let's say, yellow flesh on the inside, which come from the European sector. So the likes of HSBC, Stet, all of those types of breeders is where the access of our varieties come from. We have, as Simba and PepsiCo, reached out regarding putting some oats varieties in our trial. They didn't perform as well as some certain Australian genetics. So I think from a genetic perspective, we're definitely far behind versus the rest of the world. And it begs the question as to why we cannot import any potatoes, but there's no innovation locally itself.
I think, thank you for that. I think perhaps a bit more specifically, I mean, is it your dealings with ARC, I mean, has the limitations been, in your experience, been sort of funding-wise, expertise-wise, lack of will? I mean, sort of, can you tell us about that?
I think it's more an expertise problem. An example I can make is that we used to utilize the gene bank for the propagation of our varieties, and they mixed varieties with different varieties, which we only found out in certification services. So if we want to do a proper seed planning program and there's mixed varieties, we lose a year. So there's definitely an expertise gap that needs to be filled.
Thank you, Chair. Those are my questions.
Then thank you, Mr. Murray. Thanks for that. Just maybe, so that we understand this well. So I have a follow-up on is it FL2006, yeah? So that I understand the rights, the plant producer's rights have expired. And I just needed this clarified, whether there's never been anyone who approached Simba for this. So I assume it's an open variety, and I think this is what Mr. Curry was not able to answer. But I just want you to confirm what's been the...
We have not received a formal approach from anyone to access to that variety.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you for that. And maybe there's one thing that Mr. Curry said that I just need, maybe you can clarify, Mr. Curry, as well. I just want to make sure that I've understood you correctly on how Simba in South Africa uses either the open varieties or your own. So what has been the tendency elsewhere, right? When you compare to South Africa, it seems in South Africa you use less from your submissions. If you can just...
Yeah, I think I can give you a comprehensive overview of why it's structured like that. I think we need to take into account the consumers that we have, which determines the landscape of type of potato that's required. So in South Africa, we want value for money and something that's going to stretch us. So if you've got a 10-kilogram pocket, you need to make it last. And if you're looking in the processing industry, whether it's crisps or French fries, it's more a convenience factor, and you don't really care too much about affordability. Therefore, in areas like Europe, they've got a 70-30 model because of the distribution of processing varieties versus home use varieties. So there's basically 80% of all varieties planted in most of Europe is processable. So if they go to farmers, they contract 70%, the other 30% is open on spot. So depending on the seasonal yield, that will determine the price of the difference of that 30%. Whereas in South Africa, everybody in the processing sector is dependent on only 15% of supply, of which only half of it will be either suitable or not suitable for your use, depending on what you want to do. So the focus point here is to give nutritional value and stomach full, and not necessarily ease of snacking. So, and therefore, the distribution of potatoes within South Africa is 85% ware potatoes to the household, and 15% processing.
That's quite helpful. And to what extent, I think you've shared very useful information. I just don't want to go through all of the slides that are here, but to what extent do pressures downstream influence your procurement strategies for potatoes? I think I don't want to go, I assume you have, I don't want to traverse on confidential information. I hope you stop me if I do that, because I think you do look at your competitors, and I think it's Ipsos that has provided independent information on where the pressures are at retail and what's happening to Simba products. You know, which products are doing well and who are your competition? Who is your competition? How does that influence in any way procurement strategies at upstream, for potato? Do you look at what your competitor, is it Willard, what are they using, and how does that, or the other smaller players, how does that influence your strategy of whether you let surplus through to the market or you claw back on it?
I think the pressure isn't necessarily a retail problem. It's more, in the procurement strategy, it's more an agricultural problem. And as in the reference made in the submission before, we compete for the resource, which is the farm and the land itself. I think the processing industry would benefit from a more fixed supply basis, whether it's us, competition, or the likes of French fry, because there is growth potential from a retail perspective. So it's a global phenomenon where the cost of potato itself, and I think in the broader midst of the national fresh produce market inquiry, high value vegetable crops are at risk because of the extreme amount of cost and risk associated to it. We see more and more that farmers are moving to grain crops to mitigate their risks and to manage their farming practices. A lot of the times in areas in Africa as well as in Europe, there are acquisitions from multinationals who buy farms, and they're not interested in farming high-risk crops.
All right, thank you for that. Maybe last on that, right, can I confirm, have you said your own observations that prices past 5 years have increased 74%? Did I hear you well? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I worked it out mathematically, so it could be incorrect, but yes, that's my observation. There's a document that was sent out last week Monday by Potato South Africa that had a cumulative number of bags sold on the market as well as average price obtained versus the last 5 years. I took the difference. That difference is 74% higher than the 5-year average at a rate of 9.5% less volume sold, which is quite interesting because if you take a month ago, that number was 64% higher in price, but 10.5% lower. So in other words, the volume has grown, but the price has also grown, which is contrary to popular belief, because normally volume increases, price should drop. It's not the case.
What's your observation? What do you make of that?
I think that there's been elements of frost in Limpopo that's driven the crops to be not as good as what they used to be in the past, and therefore the volume that goes through to the market is more regulated in a sense where it's not 1 million bags a day at the market, but more 500,000, and that keeps price at a good level. Input cost, does that have an impact? No, it's got nothing to do. And remember, the price formulation on the market is based on supply and demand alone. So input cost has got nothing to do with it, however it helps the farmers a lot.
No, that's quite understood. I think here you just focus on the supply aspect. Yeah. I think you are raising, it's an observation, right? Yeah. Prices are increasing, yeah, and volumes, I suppose, are decreasing, but not at that rate, at the higher rate, yep, right? Which may not, don't want to use words, put words into your mouth, but it's I just want to understand. I think when you say frosting, what is this? Maybe
frost. So it's a winter phenomenon where the crop has got cold damage, which means that the yield that you could potentially obtain is lower. So in other words, let's say the surface area that was planted at an assumption of X volume, that is 20 or 30% lower, which means that, so what we normally refer to as a reference of true potato price is if there's 1 million bags on the market to be sold, we understand what the value is in the consumer's eyes, because that's more or less where that demand point lies.
One last question on the pricing, just because I think as a global company, how do prices per ton compare, so of what you're able to get from the market or from the farmers of FL to 108? How do they compare to your other key markets? So when you compare South African prices per ton relative to your other markets
in US dollars. So I mean, that's the only way we can.
If you whichever, even if in US dollars, I think.
Well,
it's okay.
It's impossible to draw a like-for-like comparison because we have localized supply alone. The Asia Pacific countries have to import, for instance, so their pricing is double South African pricing, whereas Egypt is similar. But it's very difficult to draw comparisons. So it's all it's relative to the market itself and also relative to the affordability of the consumer within that market.
Maybe let me ask differently. So maybe at the retail level, what has been the impact on your most popular packets? I think you have what's the big one, the big Simba packet or Lace, or what has been the impact on prices in South Africa when you compare also with your other markets?
Look, I'm not
Yes, you're not
at liberty to answer that question because I don't have the commercial oversight from a global comparison perspective.
No, that's okay. I think you can, because I just want to understand again, reason, of course, we have Simba here, and as you can see, the fresh produce market inquiry will look at different aspects of the value chain. So just to understand at least the value chain for potatoes with respect to the snaking, business and how that works. But I think if you're able to, at least from a Simba perspective, so that we can see where South Africa is relative to other markets, I think that would be very helpful. Maybe last question, I think you have suggested something, and I always, it's better that I ask you on the Khodiso. Is it Khodiso fund? You think that could be a better, maybe a reference point for, as you say, for government should set up more of these funds and ensure that they are properly administered for the benefit of HDP farmers? Can you expand on this? If we are to take it forward, how can this be done? And maybe you can share a bit more on the Khodiso fund, what you have allocated to it, what you see going forward as well.
So from PepsiCo's perspective, we'd like to make public commitment an evergreen one, as opposed to having a time frame or a rand value attached to it. And in order to do that, there needs to be co-funding, because the more we stretch the funding, the more target audience we can reach. And the bigger that target audience becomes, the more the actual influence and effect is from a penetrative perspective. So if there are a multitude of separate funds, we're going to be running different projects in different times and not really achieving much. I had a constructive discussion with the IDC yesterday to say, can we not venture together and help food security? Because ultimately the goal is not only transformation, but it's to make sure that everybody that sits in the room and the rest of the South Africans here can get something that's affordable to them, and we can thrive as an economy, as a country together. And if we do this as a collective, it will be a lot more powerful by utilizing those economies of scale.
All right, thank you very much.
Chair, if I may, sorry, some of the terms
Parry,
just
yes.
mentioned inadvertently were confidential there, so I just want to make sure that that's not taken out of context. And unfortunately, there were a couple of comments made regarding certain of the elements within the Khodiso fund, which we would like to maintain as confidential. So we'll write to the panel just to articulate those. We're happy to share that information with the panel, but it is subject to confidentiality. And one of the terms was mentioned, but I'm not going to keep repeating that term here, but I think there are some fundamentals which we will write to you in relation to.
Okay, that's okay. I think we've tried at least to keep it broad, right? I think we've done our best there. So if you can, I think just, I think it's in, you know those paragraphs, is 36 and 37 of your letter. So if you can expand on that so that we can understand this proposition much better. Are you saying there are some terms that were disclosed here in this session now by me or by
No. Unfortunately, not by you. We're not in any way saying that you have. No, I think it was just some of the content there which we'd like to ensure remains confidential. So, unfortunately, it's been said in this, but we'll just articulate that to you in writing.
All right. Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much.
Chair, just one the point to clarify is the question Mr. Ngobisi asked of where does Simba procure potatoes, where there's a shortage of its own varieties, got confirmations not from the fresh produce markets, from spot prices with other farmers who have open varieties. Just to confirm that point.
No, that's fine. Thank you. In fact, there's one question. I just know that you probably have these numbers offhand. I hope it's not confidential. But you have said this is, you procure 6 to 7% of total volume. I think Mr. Curry did allude to that. What's the rent value of it on an annual basis? How much you spend on potatoes? This is really my last question. You've said 6% of volume, so we can try to work that back. But
So I think we'll send that to you in writing. It's confidential. But my client confirmed. But that percentage, I believe, is a volume-based percentage. So, yeah.
of the entire market.
Yes. So there's certification statistics that we can send to showcase the certified seed data over time. So from a seed certification perspective, our varieties about 6 to 7%, but it changes on a yearly, but more or less there.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Do you have any closing remarks you want to give, Mr. Oxener, Mr. Curry?
I think we're clear, and we hope we've been of some assistance. Obviously, we'll follow up in relation to each of those issues which we've undertaken to do, and to the extent that there's any confidential information which we need to ensure is claimed as such, we'll articulate that in our correspondence. But we've taken note of all the questions. Those which require additional input, we will certainly address you in writing. And we thank the panel, we thank the evidence leader for a productive session, and we hope our responses have been productive in response.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the time. Thank you. We will. I think we need to move on to the next stakeholder, but I'd suggest that we take, say, 5 minutes so that you just do the necessary. I think admin that goes with it. So thank you very much. Just 5 minutes, and then we'll be with the other stakeholder. So thank you very much for making the time. I'll hand over to Mr. Ngobese.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning? Good morning, Gordon and Mr. Cunningham. If perhaps, just by way of order, if you can please place yourself on record for this session.
I'm Gordon Pentecost, and I'm the Group Legal Advisor for the SPAR Group Limited.
I'm Courtney Cunningham. I'm head of the Fresh Produce Division for SPAR Group.
Thank you, both. Gordon, just if I may ask, who is going to speak on the submissions?
We both are.
You both
I will
are.
deal with certain aspects, and Mr. Cunningham will deal with some other aspects,
Okay.
if that's all right with you.
That's fine with us. Perhaps the question that we need to ask then is, are you both willing to take the oath? Do you have any objections taking
I
the
am.
oath?
I'm willing to take the oath.
And Mr. Cunningham?
Same for me, willing to take those.
Okay, there is a paper there in front of you. If you can simply read from the first part, not the second part.
I swear that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you,
I
Gordon.
swear that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. If we can then start by you telling us about, I know you've said this several times, Gordon, how your business is structured between yourselves and your SPAR stores, but probably you can expand more in relation to this inquiry and what SPAR is doing in terms of HDPs and SMMEs, also on the pricing issue, what is your own approach, and all of those things, basically, just to give context to the whole discussion.
Thank you. I think over the years we've endeavoured, I'm not sure if that's successfully, to try and explain to the Competition Commission that we are different from the other major retailers. SPAR, in fact, is a wholesaler. We are not retailers. I think that's a very important distinction that you need to make. The SPAR Group, as such, consists of approximately 2,500 stores, which consists of SPARs, which are grocery stores, TOPS, which are liquor stores, Build It, which is hardware products, and pharmacy, obviously pharmaceutical goods. But I assume this inquiry is merely concerned with the grocery aspect of our business. The grocery retailers consist of Super SPARs, SPARs, Quick SPARs, SPAR Express, those are situated at petrol stations, and Save Mores. And obviously the Super SPAR will be the biggest, going down to a Save More, which is the smallest. As far as the grocery component is concerned, there are approximately 1,031 SPAR grocery stores making up the various formulas. Of those stores, only 40 approximately are owned by SPAR. The rest are not owned by SPAR, they're owned by independent retailers. And the major reason why SPAR would own a store is that the retailer has failed financially. And as a result, we've had to perfect on our notarial bond, take possession of the store and run it, with the intention that we would try and on-sell it to another retailer to try and recover the losses that we may have suffered, because we've obviously had to write off considerable amounts due to the failure of that retailer. There might be other situations. Apologies, I have got a bit of a cough. The other situation is that the retailer has said, I can't continue, please take my store back. I've hit the wall, and a similar situation will arise. What is important for this competition, for this commission to understand that over 95% of SPAR stores are owned by independent retailers. The SPAR model is a voluntary trading model in terms of which the retailer owns the store. It is not a franchise model. With a franchise, the franchisor has strict control over the franchisees. We don't exercise anywhere the same amount of control over our retailers. They obviously have to comply with certain conditions, labour laws, health and safety, etc., but should they not do so, then there are certain disciplinary procedures that are brought into place to make sure that they do comply with the necessary requirements. But the important thing is to understand they are independent, which is very important in determining where you're going in respect of this inquiry. As a result, because they are independent, they have the right to purchase goods from who they wish. They've got three potential options. The first, they can buy through the SPAR's distribution centres. Now, we have 6 distribution centres as far as groceries are concerned: KZN, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, Lowveld, and 2 here in Gauteng, being North Rand and South Rand. So the reason why they would buy from the distribution centres, obviously they can buy the whole variety of goods, a whole trolley of the various items that they want, as opposed to getting one there and one there. That's what they might utilise that system. The second is through drop shipment, where they go to a particular supplier and see, please, will you supply me those goods? The supplier would deliver those goods directly to the store. However, SPAR is responsible for payment to that supplier for those particular goods. And the third is that they can source from an independent source. They can buy from whoever they wish. It is their entitlement. And as well as when you come to fresh produce, if they so wish, they can go to the local market. They're entitled to do so. That's their choice. So the SPAR model, in fact, allows the small-scale farmer to support stores should the retailer so wish him so to do. So that's, I think, the important distinction that you have to make with SPAR is this independence, and the retailer has the right to choose where he wishes to purchase his goods. So that's just a brief, perhaps, overview, which I hope we've been endeavouring over the years to explain why we're different from the other major retailers. But that, I hope, gives you to understand how we differ, the model, the independence, and the choices that are available to the various retailers as to where they source their particular goods. So that's a very high-level introduction as to how SPAR operates. If I can turn to Mr. Cunningham, I think for him to now deal with the question of how we, in fact, acquire our fresh produce. What is our source? How does SPAR operate in that regard?
Good afternoon. So in terms of fresh produce, it's a very fast-moving division within our business. We have to have shelves full all of the time, every day of the year. And for that, we need to look around within as much South Africa as we can to try and procure within the borders. We want to do that. It's the right thing. And therefore, probably 99% of our procurement does come from within the borders of South Africa. In terms of produce, I'm responsible for all fruit, all vegetable, and all value-added products. So value-add would still be fresh, but it would be something like a soup, stir-fry, anything that is processed but still fresh. So what we would do is we would look at the different demographics of where our stores are, and we would try and put product into those stores that would be suitable for that customer, for that demographic. We procure from about 150 farmers nationally, and we supply the SPAR stores with about 550 product lines. So once again, all value add, all fruit and veg. Like Gordon was saying just now, we would deal directly with farmers because a very, very important, if not the most important part of our business is food safety. We can't be procuring from a product that might have banned substances on it, banned chemicals, that is not food safe. If someone gets sick out of a SPAR store, they don't look at the origin of the product, they look at that it's the SPAR banner above the door that made them sick. So it's very, very important that we look at accredited farmers that have got their food safety audits and requirements in place.
Thank you. That will be all from you.
I can try and elaborate along seasons and climatic conditions if that will help. Like I said earlier, we do try and have shelves full in our stores every day of the year for the customer to come in. What that means is that we do procure from different areas. So if it's a summer production season in Limpopo, that would probably run 3 or 4 months. When that season comes to an end, we might pull product out of KZN or the Free State or the Western Cape. Once again, we try not to have any break in the supply chain whatsoever. So we do look at seasonality. Going back to what I said, 99% comes from within the borders of South Africa. Occasionally, a 1% we need to import, and that was just because we don't have a growing season within South Africa. There might be a period of 6 weeks where the Western Cape doesn't produce grapes, and we would then need to pull in from somewhere like Spain. We might pull in from Zim, Mozambique, Tanzania, those type of places, just to fill that short gap. We don't want to do this because it's not cost effective. Produce is a low value commodity, so to be transporting produce around the country and around from the Northern Hemisphere is not what we want to be doing. So we do, but occasionally we need to for that 1% of the time.
If I can just add a few points to that, which I think is quite necessary to take into account. We're obviously very conscious about packaging. And so we ensure that as far as packaging concerned, that the packaging companies, I think we've got about 19 of those, if we're not, they must comply with the necessary requirements for food safety. I think the next point, which I think is important to take into account, is the question of logistics. SPAR is not responsible for the transportation from the farms to our distribution centres. That is dealt with directly by the logistic companies. We have to make sure they've got the necessary accreditation, and when the product arrives at the distribution centre, we check to see both that the truck itself has got the necessary temperatures and the product itself has the necessary temperatures. That's extremely important to us because obviously the food chain and the cold chain is imperative in determining that it's safe. I think another point which I think we need to take into account is what factors do we take into account in determining who our suppliers are? And I think some of the criteria are, number one is food safety. It's way above everything else because we cannot be in a situation whereby food is put into our stores which is not safe. Because even though they're independent retailers, the word is out, it's a SPAR store, and the brand is in distribute, and we've got to then deal with those issues. So safety is absolutely essential. I think, as Courtney's indicated, the question of supplying nationally is also important to us. We have to make sure that all our stores, and you're dealing with 1,031 stores, that they've got sufficient produce on their shelves. Because if we don't, we lose customers. Absolutely important. We have to obviously take into account seasonality. We have to make sure when dealing with the suppliers throughout the year are the various products going to be available to us. That's important. And lastly, the diversity of the commodity. That's another factor. The question you may ask is, are any of our suppliers, are they SMMEs or are they BE? There are a few, there's no doubt about that, but obviously they're going to have to comply with these requirements. So, for example, we've got, I think it's called Tebi, isn't it? They provide, they're a totally black-owned company, supply all the letters to South Africa. And I think what also you must take into account, the SPAR model encourages entrepreneurship. So of our 1,031 stores, I think well over 200 have got either owned totally by a BE retailer or they've got a shareholding. And we encourage entrepreneurs, any person who is a BE person who wants to acquire a store or part ownership in a store, we provide them with a loan at minus 4% prime, which is a huge incentive for any retailer coming into the business, which unlike when you sit with the corporate stores or the franchises, which are extremely restrictive and extremely demanding with the payment of royalties, etc. Those are not, nobody pays royalties to us. There's a small amount which is paid to the National Guild, and that's to cover advertising and all that, but that's to their benefit. It's not money that we keep. The money that SPAR makes is through the distribution centres and the having acquired the product and having then distributed to a distribution centre. So I think those are important factors that you need to account in taking into in our situation as to how we acquire product. I think we've looked at, I think you gave three important themes that you were concerned about, and I think we've tried to address those. So I think, Courtney, again, if we can look at the first one, which deals with the question of the fresh produce market, which I can understand. It's a concern to you that that's something that you would like to see far more utilized by wholesalers and retailers, but there are issues in that regard, and perhaps, Courtney, if you can elaborate with the concerns that we currently have in dealing with the national fresh markets.
Yeah, I think the national fresh markets within South Africa, the 17 that are there, are of some concern to us. I, for one, have been on those fresh produce markets since I was about 18, coming from farming background, so I do have first-hand experience of how they operate. But there is a concern around the produce markets at the moment. The infrastructure is crumbling. There is vermin, rats running all over the place, and it's definitely a major risk for food safety. Quite often the cold storage or the CA, the controlled atmosphere rooms, are not in operation because of load shedding or haven't been maintained. And for us, this is a big risk. Once again, our objective is to have a shelf full for a customer to come in to procure to buy a food safe product. The average shelf life on fresh produce is about 5 days. So if it hasn't gone through the proper cold chain, if it's sitting out in the sun in various areas, it just degrades incredibly rapidly. So we can't, for our customers, we can't have that product on our shelf when it says it's got a 5-day shelf life, but it's deteriorated after 3 days. And that is a concern that we have with the produce markets. They have, in my impression, they have gone backwards in terms of what there's been no development. The commission that comes in from the 5% commission that's supposed to go to infrastructural development or maintenance, I don't believe has been put into the produce markets. And that's why we do procure directly from farm, because we can monitor it. We are on farms every single day, the team that I'm in and that I belong to, and we can vet the product as it comes out of the ground, and we know the complete value chain and the complete logistic chain directly into DC. However, in saying that, and as Gordon said earlier, because of the voluntary trade model, we do allow our retailers to procure from wherever they want. That is part of the model. And you will, if you go to the produce markets, you will see retailers in their SPAR shirts procuring from the fresh produce markets. So we allow that. We just, as our SPAR branded product, we don't feel it's safe enough to procure from there at the moment.
Just an interesting add-on point. My understanding is that for the utilisation of the fresh markets, an amount of 12.5% is paid, 5% for the infrastructure, and 7.5% going to the agents. And as I think Courtney's made the point, he's concerned whether the 5% is actually being utilised for the purpose for which it's being paid. And interestingly enough, one of the largest agents in South Africa is RSA, and they've branched out of the Swanee market. They've set up their own local market, so to speak, and obviously it's a far up market facility which is in the local, and people are now starting to use that, which is seeing again a problem that the local market is not being utilized. So I think those are the points we want to make. I think it's a small point, but it is of a concern, and I think Courtney has elaborated to me in discussions that issues of crime do take place at the fresh markets, and there's a concern to people if they're going there, because obviously times are right, infighting takes place between agents and all that, and one doesn't want to be exposed to in that sort of risk if you can avoid it. So that, I think, deals with theme number 1. I think theme number 2, which I don't think we need to deal with in any detail because I'm not sure that it really applies to us unless I've misread it, that deals with inputs such as seed, fertilizer, agri-chemicals. That's not something we're involved with at all. But I will just briefly, just a little later in the presentation, deal with SPAR's involvement in the rural hubs. I know that you're talking about looking at that in a little more detail later, but I think I'd just like to perhaps put it on record at this stage to see what we are doing in that regard, but we'll come to that. And I think the third theme, as I understand it, is the question of barriers to entry, expansion and participation, which I think is a huge problem as well for the small farmer. And again, perhaps Courtney, you can give an intro, and if I need to add on anything, I will do.
I think barriers to entry in agriculture within South Africa and further afield are incredibly difficult. The cost of finance is incredibly high. A farmer, even a big commercial farmer, is not getting the loan these days that they require out of the financial institutions. They might get a 50% loan to value out of some of the financial institutions. Agriculture is incredibly risky. So if you're a small, new and emerging farmer or someone wanting to commercialize, it's incredibly difficult to get any form of loan, either for production, so seed, fertilizer, irrigation, that type of thing, any form of mechanization, and then to try and work off an industry that's on average got about a 1.5 to 2% margin, it's very difficult to pay back these loans. So the getting into any form of agriculture, whatever it is, especially fruit crops, because the production time is so much longer than vegetables, is prohibitive. I think we've seen that with the figures that have gone down over the last 20 years, how many farmers used to be commercial farmers compared to what it is today. We've got the Rural Hub Initiative, which we'll touch on just now, but these initiatives need to take place. It's the right thing to do. We do want to do them. There's a lot of opportunity, but small and emerging farmers they can't afford to get into any form of agriculture at this stage. Mentorship is a major issue. Education is a major issue. And I think that's where a lot of corporates are coming to the fore and saying, well, we'd like to get involved. We'd like to help you with the hard skills, but also with the soft skills to try and develop and to try and reduce the unemployment levels in South Africa.
I think further points I can just add to that. We're talking about getting loans from financial institutions, and you can see the question of what sort of security a small farmer can provide. Whereas if a farmer goes in and he's got a SPAR contract or a Woolworths contract, the bank's going to say, well, that's going to be paid. My loan's secure. So that's an issue which I think whether government can get involved in that at all, I'm not too sure. But you can see the problems which arise for the small farmer securing any form of loan. And even if they do obtain they need a loan, they need it urgently. There are floods, there's a drought. It takes ages for it all to be processed. By then, he's gone under. He can't manage. So the question of finances is a huge problem, as you can see, for the small farmer. When we talk about the question of health and safety, which is pivotal to us in everything, for even a large farmer to get that certification, it's costing him between 1 and 2 million rand to get a certification. So you can imagine how a small farmer who's trying to, with such tiny margins that he's operating on, is now having to expend that sort of money to try and go and get an accreditation. He can't manage. It's a huge problem. Sorry, my apologies. We have dealt on the question, obviously, we need to provide nationally to be, we do actually use there are small producers that we do use, but as a result of having to make sure we've got produce on our shelves, 1,031 stores a year, we can't have little men all over the place. It's very difficult to manage administratively. But as I've indicated, the SPAR model does allow the small farmer to operate. And the advantages are, what are the advantages to a small farmer who can operate a store? He can supply directly to the store. So the retailer says, you're in my area, I can utilize your services. So this causes him to avoid having to pay the agents at the markets. He goes directly to the store, a huge saving. There's a reduction in logistic costs to him. He doesn't have to then employ a huge logistic company to transport the goods to the store. He's not caught with rebates and levies to third parties. And as a result, there's a commercialization of the local produce. The problems are food safety again. We have to ensure that there is food safety. And obviously, there's inconsistency of supplies. But as indicated to you, the SPAR model does allow it. And there certainly are SPAR retailers who will perhaps use all three methods: drop shipment, distribution center, and the local supplier to provide him with produce. So I think those are looking at the barriers.
Can I add on?
Yes, please do.
Just to add on to that and to give you some figures behind it, our SPAR brand is called Freshline, which we look at, and it probably accounts for about 40% of what you see on the shelf in a store. The other 60% comes from outside of the SPAR group. So that would, in terms of fresh produce, that would be 60% of fresh produce is bought either directly from a farmer, from a fresh produce market, or some other form of supplier. So whereas some of the other retailers would probably have 100% would be bought internally within their group. So 60% of ours comes from outside the group.
So that, I think, very broadly deals with the themes that you raised, that we thought we'd give you some sort of introduction as to our thoughts on that. As I said, I would just mention the rural hubs, because I think it's a development which SPAR has got into. we approximately have 10 rural hubs. And a rural hub is that we have identified a farmer who is previously disadvantaged, and we've now put together, they have a farm, and we've now assisting them so they can provide produce to a pack house to deal with the locals. There are certain problems that we encountered because some of the farmers who we've identified don't actually own the farm. It's owned by the local chief, so we've run the risk. We put all this infrastructure in, and the local chief might say, okay, we've had enough of you, you're out of here. So that's a risk that we run, but we are prepared to take that risk. In identifying the farmer, it's imperative that they have the necessary skill and the farm's going to be viable. We just can't take someone off the street and say, start running a farm. They've got to be fully operational. We assist the farmer. We provide seed, fertilizer, all the like so they can become operational. Once it's been harvested, it's taken to the SPAR pack house. And we arrange that for that on behalf of the rural hub farmer. And what's particularly important and interesting in the rural hubs, we guarantee the price. We actually guarantee what he's going to get. So the situation comes into the pack house. We then get hold of the distribution center and say, we've got oranges available, for example. Can you go to the various retailers and ascertain what amount of oranges do you require? And the orders that we get might not cover the entire, so we might have a shortfall. Sorry, a surplus, my apologies. The surplus will go to the local market, where it will be, dumped is probably the wrong word, but it goes to the local market. And it might be sold at a lower price than what we've guaranteed, but we've guaranteed the price. So it's a huge initiative that SPAR has got into. So we're hoping to expand it even further. And I think we really would encourage other retailers. It's not exclusive to SPAR. There's no reason why our competitors shouldn't be doing similar initiatives to try and assist farmers and who can then get into the market. And you can see what we've achieved here is that we've identified a small SMME or a small little farmer disadvantaged. We've given him an opportunity. We've guaranteed the price. And at the same time, because of what we've put in place, health and safety has been secured. There's no risk being run because what's going to the stores and to the local market is safe and healthy. So that's just a very brief outline of rural hubs and where we are. And we really, as I say, would encourage our competitors to try and do the same. I think SPAR as a company is very concerned about community issues. And there are a lot of, apart from that, many other community issues we get involved in to try and support people. I think just a few other points in just our presentation, and again, Courtney must elaborate should the need arise. We have agreements with our suppliers, which are reviewed. A long-term review is every 6 months, but in fact, every 2 weeks, there's a review takes place with a supplier. Mainly because there are changes in climatic considerations, which we have to take into account. We have to be aware that we're going to be able to get the produce that we need. As I indicated, Courtney has made the point that 99% of our suppliers are local. We try and invest in the local market to the extent to which we can. Our turnover for Freshline, and we have another line called Country Value, is approximately.
Sorry, Gordon.
Sorry.
Just make sure that you don't give any confidential information in this session.
Yes, no, I don't think we've considered that, but I don't think this particular aspect. I think our turnover as far as fresh produce is concerned is approximately 2 billion rand per annum. So that's just something that you can take into account. And obviously that doesn't take into account what the independent retailer is doing as far as getting from the local suppliers, etc. All doesn't take taken into account. I mentioned the question of packaging and the requirements that these have to be complied with. No supplier is exclusivity. We're very conscious of exclusivity and that we ensure that for each item of produce that we require, we must have at least 3 suppliers on board. So there can be no question of exclusivity. One supplier might produce more than the other, but that's because of his ability, but there's no question of exclusivity. We're very conscious of that. As regards pricing, when the distribution centre distributes to a retailer, we recommend a price, but we cannot prescribe what the price could be. He's independent. So, but obviously, if we become conscious of the fact that we think he's overcharging, some representations will be made in that regard, but we cannot determine price for the retailer. He's independent. I've dealt with the question of the fresh markets. We've dealt with the question of, yes, the issue of value added is important. As Courtney mentioned, of our 550 lines, 250 are what we call value added, which means they sliced and diced. That's an extremely expensive operation. You can't just take it out the ground and put it in. And that's very costly, and health and safety becomes even more important when you're dealing with sliced and diced products. As indicated to you, we're very concerned about health and safety. Every one of our suppliers has to have the necessary certification for us to be able to deal with them, and we check on that regularly. I've dealt with the question of cold chain, how important it is and how we check on it when it arrives at the distribution centre to make sure that it's been complied with. Obviously, there are variations in prices, but we can understand that. The fuel price jumps up and down at a regular level. Fertilizer, management weights, electricity, all those issues, and that obviously comes into play when in determining what ultimately is in price. And I think what we found, and Courtney confirmed, ultimately it's the supplier who determines the price, not us. There's negotiation, but at the end of the day, we have to get the produce. He will ultimately dictate what the price may be. So those are just a few sort of additional points that I thought I would add in. Courtney, I don't know if you want to add into anything.
I think just on that price aspect, because of our voluntary trade model, because stores can buy product from wherever they want, we need to be very much in line in terms of pricing with actually the fresh produce markets. Because if we're a rand more expensive on potatoes, the store will go to the fresh produce market to buy. Once again, he doesn't have to buy from the distribution centre. So our prices run according to what the farmer sets, which will be pretty much in line with the fresh produce market. There might be a slight premium on some products because it has gone through the auditing process, the food safety process, and that obviously obtains a premium on that. Okay.
I think probably the point in pricing, it's such a volatile market. I think Courtney will say that the price changes every day. Sometimes during the course of the day it might even change because of the volatility of the market. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairperson, that sort of concludes the presentation. What we just, it's probably at a reasonably high level, but we have given you a written submission as well, which you have. So this is just to add into that. And clearly, if you have questions you want to pose to us, we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Gordon. You've pretty much answered several of my questions in your presentation, so I hope I will be quick with my questioning. So just arising from your presentation, you said, so drop shipment will be the farmer's purchase from the farmer?
It could be directly from the farmer, or there might be a supplier, but he will place an order to say, I want whatever it may be. The farmer or the supplier would deliver it directly to the store,
yes.
But SPAR will guarantee payment to the supplier or the farmer of that particular item.
Yes.
And then we will obviously recover from the retailer what we've had to pay.
Yes. So the SPAR store will place the order with SPAR, or would they place the order with the farmer?
They would place the order directly with the drop shipment supplier.
Yes.
But we will obviously be made aware of it because ultimately we've got to pay.
Yes.
And that they will arrange for the logistics, the delivery and all that. We're not involved in all of that. Our restrictions, so our involvement is paying and recovering from the retailer.
Yes. How are you made aware of it? There's a system that is available where...
I didn't get your question, sorry.
How are you made aware of the purchase from the farmer?
The drop shipment supplier would make us aware that an order has been received from the retailer and what the terms are, etc., when it will be delivered, the quantities, the price, etc.
Yes. Are you made aware of what the farmer purchases from the National Fresh Produce Market?
Are we made aware of the farmer purchases from?
Yes, from the produce markets.
No, we would not be aware of that.
You would not be aware from your store, doesn't
no,
it?
we would not necessarily be aware of what he's purchased, and what quantities, etc. That's his right, that's his independence.
And he pays for that.
He pays for it directly. We will not be involved in the payment. The payment restricted to distribution center and drop shipment. He will deal directly with the national market regarding payment.
Okay. So you've indicated why the produce market is not preferred. To the extent that a store purchases from the produce market, do you monitor that to see how often, because of course it might affect your brand?
No, we wouldn't be monitoring it to the extent of what he is, but obviously we're taking into account what a store is selling, what he's selling goods at, and to make sure that what we're getting from the distribution centre is competitive. But we would not know. And what we would want to check on is that, remember, each store, there's what's called a regional operations manager is attached to every single store, and he will call regularly to the store to make sure that if it's not being purchased directly from SPAR, that the necessary health and safety requirements are being complied with. Because if he doesn't do so, the store's not complying, ultimately we're going to have to pick it up because the brand will be bought into disrepute.
Yes, and why do you guys pay for the drop shipment from a farmer, but don't pay for?
I think it's just
fresh produce.
Well, because the drop shipment. Remember, the drop shipment supply will be listed, so we list suppliers. So we have to be happy that the supplier who's been listed, who's going to provide the goods to the store, is somebody who's going to comply with our requirements. So that's why we're happy to pay. With the fresh market, we don't know whose goods they were, where they've come from, so we're not going to be liable for payment of that.
I think if I can just add to that as well, the drop shipment is generally for bigger orders. So if there is a large format store, a large square meterage store, they would generally order a whole truck of potatoes or a whole truck of onions. So instead of that doglegging via DC and incurring extra cost, it might go directly to a super SPAR in one of the outlying sort of areas. It's just to try and also reduce cost, but it's under our Freshline brand.
Yes.
We don't know where he gets his fresh produce farmer branded product from.
So, but obviously your 40 corporate SPAR stores, they buy strictly from SPAR, the fresh produce, or do they also
would buy strictly from SPAR, yes.
Okay. The 40% that they buy from Freshline, independent SPAR stores, can they increase that percentage, or is it a maximum, or what is it?
No, they can increase whatever.
Okay.
That's just what we worked out as what the component is of what is currently being purchased. Some stores may wish to purchase everything through the distribution centre, through Freshline. Others may not. It's their choice again. That's the independence that they have.
I see. So there is no contractual term which says
none whatsoever.
50,
None
40%.
whatsoever. We obviously, the question of loyalty comes into play in determining, a store and their performance generally, because there are incentives for stores who show great loyalty towards SPAR. But there's certainly no requirements that if they fail to buy from SPAR, that there are any penalties imposed.
Yes. Okay. Yes, on the rural hubs, with regard to the HDPs or the SMMEs that you assist on the rural hubs, do you require them to buy strictly to sell strictly to SPAR, or do you allow them to, once they've...
Obviously, it's to their advantage, because they know the price has been guaranteed, and we will take the entire harvest. So whatever tonnage he provides, we will arrange to transport that directly to the SPAR pack house, which we've built at our cost, and we will then arrange to either distribute it to the distribution centres, and if the distribution centres can't take it all, that will be taken to the fresh market. But again, his price is guaranteed.
Yes.
So there's certainly no incentive for him to try and sell it to anybody else, because he's not going to recover the same amount of money. And his price, he knows, he sold it. Here's my invoice. SPAR, please pay, and we pay.
Yes. And how long have you been doing this with his...
The rural hubs. I have to guess, I would think 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, maybe even longer, probably
Might
about
be long.
8 years.
It's been, those are probably the embryonic stage of it, but it's growing and growing. I think we started off with 3, and we've now gone to 10, and the intention is to, it's costing us money. There's no doubt about that. But we have been assisted. We had overseas funding at one stage, and the banks have to some extent funded, but the overseas funding is now dried up. So it's really SPAR to a large extent is meeting the cost. Fortunately, 1 or 2 of them have actually managed to break even, so which is encouraging. But that's what we would try and achieve with all of them, because the more that break even, the more we can expand into the market and produce more and more of these. It's quite heart-rending when you go to there and you see the number of people that have been employed as a result of these rural hubs. So it's apart from the actual, the farmer, it's all the employees that they put into place. They're in the pack houses. All those people have now been employed. So we've provided a huge amount of employment within the 10 rural hubs.
Yes. And the specific farms themselves, have they grown? Maybe individual farms who started with maybe earlier in the program, have they grown in size in terms of?
Well, yes, they certainly have. So initially, I mean, the harvest was small, and now as they've become more seasoned and more skilled in harvesting and farming, they've increased their output,
Yes.
which has been very encouraging, and obviously that's helping to try and reach a more break-even situation.
Yes. Okay. We did say that you monitor the pricing that you get from the farmer by looking at what the prices are in the fresh produce market, to see what, if you probably are still paying what's worth to be paid. Is that the basis for it? Is that the reason why you look at the prices in the fresh produce market? Or
We need to give customers the best pricing, the highest quality product at the best pricing, and I think most retailers would be doing that as well. So we do take into account, like I said, the farmers that have got all of the food safety, because it comes with a bit of a premium. We do look at various distribution centres within South Africa, so it's a lot cheaper to transport something from Limpopo to Pretoria as opposed to Limpopo to KZN. So there might be price fluctuations there. But, and touching on what Gordon said as well, we've got generally got three suppliers per commodity group. So we've got 3 potato suppliers, 3 onion suppliers, and so on and so forth. And that's to say, if one of them comes in way overpriced of what the markets are, we would say, look, you're too high priced, you're taking a chance, and we would try and push it to one of the other suppliers. So we do need to know what's going on in the market on a daily basis. However, the suppliers and the farmers also need to be able to give us the right price. They can't be at 15 Rand and everyone else is at 10 Rand, because they're not going to get the sale. So we do monitor what's going on. We also do look at the end product, how we compete with some of our other stores, our other retail competition. But essentially, it's the deal that we've got with the supplier. We do understand recently there's been weather problems in the Western Cape. Product is going to go up in price. Potato price has recently gone up, so we need to look at those. But it has to be market related, always market related. And I'm not just saying fresh produce market, it needs to be retailer, wholesaler market related as well.
yes. So but you may not know this. I don't know if you do. Do these independent SPAR retailers have contracts with the market agents? Do you know those who buy in the fresh produce market, or it's just they choose any agent?
No, I think my opinion is that if a retailer is buying from the fresh produce market, he would have some sort of agreement for payment and for the financial side of things as well. But I think there would definitely be a relationship. I've never seen an agreement that is direct between the produce market and a retailer, but I'm sure that they have their preferences.
Yes.
It would be sensible for him to do that, as opposed to just arriving at the market in the morning and thinking, well, if I've got someone who's there before me who knows what I'm looking for, he can assist me, it'll be certainly to his advantage.
Believe me, we've heard stories about that. So you will be surprised. Such big purchases being made without agreements. So we note that. Do you Do you know if the retailers themselves do compare the prices with the fresh produce market when they are actually pricing their own end user customer? Do you think they do that?
Sorry, amongst themselves?
No. Let's say a retailer A, does he check what's happening in the national fresh produce market in terms of pricing when he determines his own prices to his own customers?
Well, I'm sure he probably would check, but I would assume, again, we're making some assumptions here,
Yes,
but I would assume
yeah.
he probably would be utilizing the services of the agent to try and assist him in pricing, because the agent's there on the floor daily and he would be aware of what was available in the pricing.
Yes. The list of farmers that you have, you said it has grown.
Talking about the rural hub.
Not just the rural hub, just all the farmers that you purchase the fresh produce from. Has it grown?
It has grown over the years. We've probably got about 150 farmer suppliers at the moment. We also do need to make it worthwhile that it doesn't grow any further, because it's not economically viable for farmers. So if they only get an order for one pallet onto a truck, there's empty space they're transporting, and the cost of logistics will go up. So we try and restrict it to the farmers that we know. Yes, we will, through the Rural Hub Initiative, we will bring that in, but that's a different business model. But we don't want to go to 500 farmers, because then it's just too dilute and it's not good for anyone's business. The farmers are going to be not sending enough. It's not going to be worth their while to send it through to a market. Especially touching on what I said earlier, produce is a low-value commodity. You know, you can't be transporting a 3 rand cabbage all the way from Zanin to Pretoria. It's not economically viable. So we try and give the farmers big enough volumes to be able to make it worth their while.
Yes. So then you prefer to grow individual farmers in terms of scale rather than expanding the list of additional farmers that you have? Is that your approach to this?
I think what may happen is that obviously I think we get regular requests to be listed as a supplier, but I think the requirements are so stringent when it particularly comes to health and safety, and the requirement to be able to provide nationally is a bit of a barrier to a small farmer coming in who now wants to be listed to be one of SPAR's national suppliers. He might well be able to achieve that purpose by dealing directly with the retailer in his area, or alternatively using the national fresh market to sell his goods. But to become listed is not easy. The costs are huge.
Okay, is there a criteria that you use to list the farmers?
I think I mentioned that earlier.
Yes, I think you
Food safety is number one.
Yes.
It's not even an issue. Sorry. Food safety is number one. It's not even an issue. And then his ability to supply nationally, his seasonality, and it's got prolonged growth. And also, I think, Courtney, correct me if I'm wrong, some of our farmers produce more than one particular item. So to be able to go to a farmer who's got 2 or 3 different items is far more sensible to us, as opposed to 150 little isolated one product. So those are some of the criteria we've taken into account in determining who should be listed, and those get monitored regularly. So if he fails to comply with our requirements, we'll delist him. There's no question we cannot compromise on safety.
Okay.
SPAR has within the SPAR group, we have a safety. We've got a safety department, and you may be aware that we conduct regular audits at all our stores, not only obviously with fresh, but in every aspect. So the audits are conducted, and if a retailer fails an audit regularly, steps are taken to deal with that. We cannot allow a retailer to just be failing audits. I think there's the audit percentage, correct me if I'm wrong, is probably well over 80%. They have to comply in various aspects, and if they fail, we go in. There's a re-audit takes place, and in addition, we will go in and try and assist them to deal with the areas where they're failing, to make sure that in the re-audit they can pass. But it's monitored very carefully.
Okay. No, thanks, Gordon. Like I've said, I think you in your presentation, you've covered most of my questions. Just a few things to clear, I think two of them. On page 2 of your submission, you mention wholesalers. That will be SPAR, right? You list. So that will be with reference to SPAR, the group. Yes, yes. So, sorry, you say SPAR group retailers will procure from the following sources.
Correct.
That will be the farmer, the fresh produce market, processor, and the wholesaler. The wholesaler there is SPAR, the group.
No, so I think, so the SPAR as a group will procure from farmers directly.
Yes.
The SPAR retailers, the SPAR stores, might procure from a wholesaler because of that voluntary trade model.
I see. So there are wholesalers whom your stores can buy
Correct.
from.
So our store might go directly to a wholesaler and procure from them.
Do you know who are those wholesalers that some stores buy from?
I'm not sure whether you get fresh produce, but I know, for example, Macro is an example of a wholesaler that SPAR retailers would utilize to acquire goods.
I see. Okay, so we're short of your DC there in the list.
Get you, sorry?
We're short of your distribution center in the list from where the SPAR stores can
So
procure
the SPAR
product.
stores have got, I say, the various options. But we said there's the distribution centers, drop shipment, directly from a supplier, wholesalers. All those are available to them. It's their choice.
Yes. Okay. Just one last question. Can you just indicate what are the challenges that one will have in procuring directly from the grower as opposed to the fresh produce market? What challenges are there, other than health issues on food safety?
From the grower, directly from the
Yes.
farmer.
What are compared the two? Which one?
Well, I think we've given the problems that we face with the fresh produce market.
Yes.
And to a large extent, having ensured that we made sure that the farmer has the necessary accreditation. We have ensured that the packaging is correctly dealt with. We've ensured that the logistics and getting the produce to the distribution centres adhered to, checking on that it takes place. Those are all the huge advantages that the farmer has over the fresh market.
Okay. Chair, that will be all from.
Thank you, Mr. Ngovese. Mr. Mare, do you have any questions? Okay, please.
Thank you, Chair. I really only have two follow-up questions and one comment, and let's start with a comment perhaps, and I think it's related to what you mentioned, the SPAR Rural Hub. Our technical team has had an opportunity to do a site visit to the Mopani SPAR Rural Hub, and it's something that I think is worthy of exploration in a public forum. So, I mean, the comment is perhaps, I mean, we're thinking about expanding the public hearings in a second round of public hearings and have additional stakeholders. Would SPAR be willing to return to a second round of public hearings specifically to talk about the SPAR Rural Hub and particularly, you know, the details, non-confidential details? I think it's worthy of that discussion, particularly, Gordon, in the context of, you know, a sort of business model or sort of program that can be rolled out to retailers, to other supply development.
Indeed, we would be available. Courtney and I are not the experts in that particular field, but we would ensure that the people who are dealing with the rural hubs, I've already mentioned it to them, that there will be a second round and they're very available to come and assist, because we believe it's something which is important for this country, and we believe if it can be expanded to other retailers and other companies, it would be a huge advantage to this country.
Thank you, Gordon. I think that's helpful. We'll keep that in mind. I think the first follow-up is in relation to the food safety standard. So there in your submission also refers to Global Gap. Our understanding, obviously, is that Global Gap is sort of the gold standard. That is, exporters use the same standard when they export. At the same time, there is something that has been developed and is still sort of undergoing development called Local Gap, which really the only different understanding is that it takes away some of the superfluous requirements. Would SPA, in requiring these accreditation, these certification standards, consider a local gap as opposed to sort of a global gap as a minimum requirement?
Yes. So initially what we do with new farmers that come onto our supplier base, our stipulation is to start as a local gap. We did that with our rural hub as well. We will, though, however, put time frames in place to say within 18 months or within 2 years, you need to be up to global gap standards. So by all means, we do that.
All right, thank you. And then
I think, sorry, if I could just add a point, I think what's quite important, I think in looking at this whole accreditation and the cost that involved, I really believe that we should have some government intervention in this regard to assist farmers, because if we don't have enough food in this country, and it's a great concern at the moment, I believe it is a concern, agriculture is a problem. And if the market gets even further diminished because of the strict requirements of accreditation and the costs involved, it's going to present a crisis. And I do believe, it's not for me to advocate what should happen, but I believe it would really be of assistance if government became involved in assisting farmers with this accreditation and looking at the standards that are required. So we need to balance safety as against the costs, and something has to happen in that regard. That's my views. My apologies.
thanks, Gordon. Then also, my final question is, we've heard a bit about Fresh Line and that being SPA's brand for fruit and vegetables. There was a slight mention to a different brand called Country Fresh. So I'd just like you to expand on that brand. And I'm asking the question in the context of participation and opportunities for participation. How does the Country Fresh brand compare to Fresh Line?
I think it's Country Value. Expand on that.
We launched the Country Value brand 5 or 6 years ago for two reasons. One, as a more affordable option for maybe lower income households, and it's generally sold as a bulkier product. So Fresh Line might be a 1 kilogram apples, Country Value might be a 3 kilogram apples. What it also allows is it allows farmers to not have to dump their produce. It allows a second grade product to be sold. Remember, a farmer never farms to plant second grade. He always farms to have the choice grade or the first grade. So we were giving farmers, and it's not across all of our lines, but it's more along the line of hard veg, where we've introduced this Country Value, specifically for the customer to have an affordability option. And then also allow the farmer, should he have surplus, not to be dumping it, that we will actually provide him with a route to market.
I think an example, it's a very simple example. We might take carrots, and they might be a bit crooked, so they're not strictly symmetrical, and that would go into the Country Value. So there's nothing wrong with the carrot, but it might not quite cover grade 1.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mare. Maybe just some follow-up questions. Just on the rural hubs, maybe we can engage at a later stage. But you did mention that only 2 farms have reached break even. Did I hear you correctly?
I'm not sure of the number. I know that there has been a break-even situation. I was advised the other day there had been a break-even. I cannot give you the number, but whatever the situation may be, obviously we're delighted if they reach a break-even, because that allows for expansion. But even if they don't achieve the break-even, we will continue to fund those particular farms.
No, I'm asking this from the point of view of sustainability. So you say 6-8 years, the program has been running, and is it only 2 farms? Okay, you say, or you don't say only 2.
I'm not sure of that, and I think.
But you had said so. Just clarify what you meant.
I understand. I've been advised, and I'm not in the rural hub division.
Okay.
I understand there's been a break-even situation achieved. along the way. I'm not too sure of the number, but I think perhaps it would be important when you have the follow-up, that the whole question of the rural hub and how they've managed to achieve a break-even and where we are amongst the 10 and what our plans are, etc. I think they'll give you a lot more detail than what I can provide you with. At this stage, I was aware that the intention was that you wanted to have a follow-up on rural hubs, so all I wanted to do was just introduce it at this level, at a very high level, to say that's what we're doing at the moment, and really looking to see what you could do to try and encourage others to get into a similar program. But as I say, we're very amenable to return at a later date, and the experts who have all the knowledge of rural hubs will be able to present you with all that information that you may require.
All right, that's fine. Maybe what could help is, and I think the technical team can do that, is to also have written follow-up questions just on the beneficiaries of the program. So it's really about facts around.
That would be extremely valuable. So if they could, if we come to a hearing on, a similar presentation can be made on the question that you've raised, and then the follow-up questions can then follow, which will give you an overall view of where we are with rural hubs.
All right. No, thank you very much. Now, on this 95% requirement, the service standard, I think it's you have it there set out, right? That the suppliers have to meet 95%. And the key thing also, ability to supply nationally. Now, on these two things, on the 95%, what has been your experience? Have you, how many farmers, if you are able to quantify, do fall off on an annual basis for not meeting the standard, and what's been the prevalence, which provinces, what have you picked up?
So we've set that 95% service delivery. The reason why it's not 100% is because it's agriculture. There's climate, there's logistics, there's issues that affect it. Excuse me. We are quite lenient when it comes to trucks arriving late, but there are parameters in place that we have to adhere to. In terms of farmers falling off that, we haven't had any. I've been at SPAR 5 years, we haven't had any farmers fall off. If there's a problem, they communicate incredibly well with us. Blocked highways, truck accidents, that type of thing. So it's all about communication, and therefore we've adhered to all of our farmers.
I don't know. Thank you. And on the ability to supply nationally, I need to understand this better, because you have distribution centers. So what do you mean about ability to supply nationally?
Understanding of the situation, obviously,
yes.
as I explained, we have, I think it's just about 1,031 SPAR grocery stores. And to those grocery stores, we need to provide fruit and vegetables on a daily basis. So it's important that the suppliers that we've identified are able to comply with our requirements, so that we have fruit and vegetables on the shelves every single day. And that's why it's a requirement they can provide nationally to the distribution centers.
Well, I may understand that on a differentiated product. So this is a brand that, like this one, it's water. Maybe you want all of these kind of branded water nationally. But if it's bananas, I just want to understand this. So bananas are commodities. So if you have a small farmer who can supply something through to the distribution center, why would you insist that they must be able to have the volumes that would reach your sort of national footprint when you are dealing with really a commodity? And this is, I think, applies to fresh produce. I just want to understand this requirement.
Chair, so pretty much it's dictated on climate. So bananas, as an example, there are going to be areas where bananas grow at certain times of the year. What we would look to do is we would look to partner with companies that would be able to supply inland and also the coastal areas. So they have got the logistics, they've got the ripening rooms, they've got that sort of infrastructure that they would be able to supply. Once again, it's to not dilute the supplier base too far that it's not economically viable for the farmer. We want to fill trucks, we want to maximize the logistics side of things. So on those commodities, potatoes, citrus, bananas, we do look to have suppliers nationally that might have facilities or farms in each of the provinces and that can supply. I don't want to be transporting bananas from Limpopo down to Cape Town. It's just, it happens on bananas, but it's too expensive. So we would look at, can potatoes be grown in the Western Cape and Limpopo under one company? It's just, it's economically viable and that sort of thing.
Maybe I don't understand this very well, but I'm trying to sort of, so when someone supplies to the distribution center, right, and then you handle the product, do they have to meet, so all your suppliers currently for fresh produce meet that kind of requirement? So for everything you procure, I look at this, I contrast this with the Rural Hub program, right, where you are able to support smaller farmers who I would assume will not be able to meet that kind of scale. And how do you sort of reconcile this requirement with this idea that you need to, in fact, you call yourself your market leaders for developing SMEs and HDIs. How do you then reconcile these two?
I think I understand your question. What we would do is we would try and have as many farmers as close to a distribution center as possible, because it's route to market is easier, it's quicker, it's faster. So it's almost a local is lacquer kind of approach where, you know, we've got suppliers that can supply into KZN, we've got suppliers that can supply into North Rand. There are certain commodities that won't work for. Subtropical crops are only grown in the Mpumalanga, Limpopo area, not down in the Cape. So those commodities we would have to trunk or we would have to truck across. But if we have a supplier in the Brits area and he's supplying into only our North Rand DC, by all means, that would work for us, because it keeps the cost of shipping low value commodities around the country.
All right, no, thank you. Are you able, maybe for our purposes, just to understand, so to get information on the farmers that have approached you and you declined them on this particular basis?
I wouldn't have that offhand.
Yeah, I don't say you.
But
give
perhaps
that
if you want to send us the question, I will endeavour to get the answers to that. But I certainly don't have that offhand.
Yeah, I think that will be quite helpful. Thank you.
So Mfundo will send that on to us.
Yeah, Mfundo will do that. So you have question 35. So just want to understand, because we are trying to understand the price transmission, from source to retail. And I think you say farmers and suppliers dictate the price of the commodity to the SPAR group. Can you explain this? What does this mean in practice?
So the farmers will put their price on according to what inputs they've put in: seed, fertilizer, logistics, that type of thing. So we would look at a product arriving at the DC, and the farmer gives us his price. We are not price takers, so what that means is that if he's outpriced according to what happens on the fresh produce market or what happens out in the general market, we might decline from a farmer to say, look, we're not buying from you, you are overpriced. We will look at one of our different suppliers. So because it's such a fast-moving consumer good, you do need to have, the farmer does need to come in with his price as a market-related price. Occasionally there are shortages and prices ramp up, but once again, those have to be market related. We can't be twice the price of the market or of one of the other retailers.
All right, okay. No, thank you. So just maybe three more issues. Just on the payment terms, what to the farmer? So from the DC to the farmer.
The farmer will supply the goods to SPAR, and he will provide his invoice, and we will effect payment. And the payment terms, whether I should be disclosing the payment terms, I'm not too sure, but they're very reasonable.
No, in terms of the time it takes to pay. What's been your...
So SPAR has a set in terms of our agreements. We will enter into an agreement with each particular supplier, and we will then arrange payment accordingly. I think as a rule of thumb, and I'm not in the finance department, so please don't quote me, but my recollection is normally 30 days. On 30 days of invoice, we effect payment.
So that's the standard. So if we
unless there's some other terms that might be introduced, he might correct me if I'm wrong. We might have a situation that he says, well, if you pay me in 7 or 14 days, I'll give you a discount. But that's normal commercial practice.
So I can quote you on 30 days. You say
I would prefer it if you. I could prefer it if you can. I'm not in the finance department, so I would prefer it if.
All right.
Mfundo, if you could put that question to me, coupled with the other one we've just had about who we didn't list, and I will confirm that, if you don't mind. I don't want
to. That's okay.
I don't want to go on oath and then be found that I haven't given you. I don't be caught before perjury before the Competition Commission.
Of course, I think we will.
But I will revert to you. I undertake to.
Yes. No. Thank you very much. You have raised this point. I just want, because we have heard this about the markets, and you raised it in your opening, but also in the submission. And you said there should be an inquiry conducted with the usage of the Market Commission, the 5%, regarding upkeep and development of the market. Just can you, what do you have in mind around this? Right? Is it the level of what the municipality retains, or is it the reinvestment? So this is what I think we are picking up a theme, but I just want to hear from.
I think my understanding is the entire maintenance of the fresh market. The fresh market leaves an awful lot to be desired. I mean, there's the actual facilities that they provide are problematic. I understand, I haven't been to them, but I understand there are potholes all over the place, which makes transportation difficult. It's infestation, which is of a frightening nature. The cold rooms that are not operating. So the whole safety becomes an issue. And I think we're saying that something needs to be, we can't do anything about it, but there needs to be some intervention in dealing with this aspect to make sure, because I know it's, and I can understand, you want the fresh produce markets to be viable, because it's important, and because it's a source of income for the small farmer, that he can utilize that facility. But if the facility is not operational of a desired nature, people are not going to use it. How you as a commission can get involved in dealing with it, I don't really know. I can't prescribe that, but I would urge you to try and get involved in that somehow, that something can be done about it. Because you can see what's happened with RSA and Schwani just opting out, setting up their own facility, and everyone's going to start using it because it's a nice facility. It's the cold chain's working efficiently. The infrastructure is good. Everyone's going to, and I can see that people are going to start outsourcing from the fresh markets, which is contrary to what you want to achieve. But I say I can't prescribe how something needs to be done about it.
All right, no, thank you. And maybe the last question, I know this is a tricky question for SPAR, but I ask with respect to fresh line. Because we just want to understand the spread, because I think you track the price from the DC then to who sets the price at retail for fresh line products?
The retailer. SPAR recommends the price. We recommend the price to the retailer, what we believe he should be selling the goods at. But he has the right, because he's independent, to determine what price he's going to sell it at. But obviously, if he sets an inflated price, he's not going to sell the goods. They're going to go to his competitors. But we don't set the price. We recommend the price.
So on the achieved prices at retail, and what you said at, what you achieve at the DC, how have you observed the spread? What's the spread in general in your experience, just for fresh produce? You set a price at DC, you see it at retail at some point, but that's why I say it's a bit tricky for you because you are not running.
As I understand, the question you're asking me is that if we set a price, the DC recommends a price, 10 Rand, for example. Are you asking me what the retail is?
What is that spread that you set, even at a recommended level? So you have your own cost, you have your own prices that you should achieve at DC, but the retailers should achieve a certain price. What has been that?
What the retailer wants to achieve, I can't comment on because that's for him to determine. Obviously, and I think it would be confidential as to what return we're trying to achieve at the distribution centre. But if that's a question that you need to ask, perhaps that could be posed as well, and I will try and get that information for you.
But I think that there's information that's in the public domain, right, around margins broadly at the group level. Right, and this is what I wanted to maybe this is the last parting shot for you. It's relative to the group margins. So margins at group. How do the margins for fresh produce compare? So
I understand the question. You're saying if we've got baked beans at a certain level and if we've got lettuce at another level, what is the difference? Is that the question you're posing to me?
Yeah, so in that category, how do you, what's the level of profitability? I'm not asking you for the actual number, the profit you've made, but just when you compare margins at group, which are public.
What the profits that the distribution centre has made in respect of fresh produce as opposed to other.
Relative to.
I don't have the answer to that, but if you Mfundu can pose the question to me, I'll endeavour to obtain it for you.
Okay, all right.
I don't have a problem with it, but I say I don't want to start quoting numbers if I don't have them because it would be improper.
No, so thank you very much. I think that's quite helpful, and I think we respect that. So I think we will. There will be follow-ups from the team. I don't know, Mr. Ngobese, you want to say something?
Yes, I have one follow-up question based on your question, Chair. Gordon, you said you recommended the price. Is it normally followed, your recommendation, or normally they deviate from your recommendation?
Again, I can't comment on that because remember we're talking about 1,031 stores. So I cannot comment as to what each store does in regard to the recommended price. Whether I'm able to, in a follow-up, provide you with some overview as to what our observations are, I would endeavour to do so. But it will be obviously take an incredible amount of research to try and ascertain from 1,031 stores as to we've recommended 10 Rand. What are you selling it at?
Okay.
But, and remember, there's a vast variety of items as well. But if you pose the question, I will endeavour to see what I can do for you.
Okay, thanks.
But I think this is a closing remark, and I think what's extremely important, I think if I can leave you with it, I think is to understand the SPAR model and how I think the SPAR model is doing an awful lot more to try and assist the small farmer and the small supplier as opposed to other large retailers who operate on a completely different model to what we do. And you can see the fact, I mean, we're talking about 40% as fresh line. You can see the vast amount which is coming from other sources. And that coupled with what we're doing with the rural hubs, the independence of our retailers, I believe we're going a long way to try and assist the small farmer in trying to get into the market.
No, thank you, Mr. Pentecost. I was going to ask you for your, if there are any closing remarks, but
No, I think
does that cover Mr. Cunningham as well?
I think it's just a closing remark to say where I believe where we are and what contribution we believe we are making to the South African economy as far as fresh produce is concerned. And I think not even restricting it to fresh produce generally, because we're not saying that the that the retailer has to only get fresh produce from the market. He can buy anything from anybody, should he so wish. And you can find, we might have certain of our retailers might only purchase 60% from the distribution centre. They'll be buying from all sorts of other people, which they're entitled to do.
Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
No,
And thank you for keeping us to our time limits. I was getting a bit nervous about flights. But thank you.
Thank you. I think we did our best.
We've done well. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. We will resume at 14:15, 2:15. Right, yes. We will resume at 2:15. Yes, for our last stakeholder for the day. So thank you very much.